Oh, yeah, it's hard. Haven't you ever used it?
Yeah, but I didn't think it was October 20th, 1985. We're here because of the fact that Debbie Gail Garber is visiting with her friend Ron Miska from San Francisco. And it was nice that Auntie Faye made a brunch in their honor. And we are going to talk about, in the course of our eating our brunch, we're going to talk about the past of the Garber family.
The olden days.
The olden days of the Garber family. Present are Faye and Milt Kirshner, Harry and Jean Garber, Morris and Evelyn Garber, and Debbie Garber and Ron Miska. And we got another tape that we did last night at the Garber home, the Morris Garber home. We did not get into the past history of the Garber family. And I think we ought to talk about that a little bit today.
We should have done. We should have played the other tape first for.
For an hour and a half.
Oh no, that takes too long. I wanted them to hear it
for an hour and a half.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You guys.
And then some, but we ran out of tape.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. We ran out of tape at the end.
So, tell us
We had a good time.
Tell us about the early history of the Garber family.
Where do you want to begin?
All right. Tell us about your folks. Charles Bazzalo Garber was the patriarch of the family, and Mindel Garber, his wife.
Mindel Zakim.
Mindel Zakim, that's right. And was the matriarch of the family.
Zakheim?
The parents of...
Z-A-K-H-E-I.
Is that a common name?
No,
because that's the name of the guy that did Coit Tower in San Francisco.
Oh my!
Really? Then he's related to the man in Chicago.
Wait,
he says all the Zakims are related.
His daughter did the book.
It's delicious.
Did he design the building or the paintings, the murals?
I think he was involved in the painting of the murals.
Yeah.
I just saw another architectural feat by a Zakheim in a magazine. It was in New York. Okay, now what I want to know is this. The Zakheims are the parents of, the senior Garbers, whose names we mentioned, are the parents of 5 children. They are, the oldest is Faye, the oldest is Carol, who, what was her?
Sadie.
Sadie was her name. And then came
Mary.
Well, her
Mary.
Yiddish name was Krina.
Krina.
That's how she got the Carol out of it.
So how did they get Sadie?
Who knows? You know, Krina was not an English-American name.
Okay, and she married George Bickman. And
then is Mary.
Then there's Mary. Was that always?
And you know what her Jewish name was?
Masha?
Musha.
Musha.
That was originally Masha.
Probably.
Oh, they always called her Musha.
Well, Masha
No,
was because
okay.
that's a Russian.
And she is now Mrs. Robert Lipkin, whose husband is deceased. And next comes, who's next? Harry.
Then is Harry.
Harry, who's married to Jean, formerly Jeanette Bender Garber.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, it's all been recorded, of course.
Oh,
And
And then is Maury.
and then comes Morris, whose wife was Evelyn Glazer, born Evelyn Glazer, and who is present today, of course. And then Faye, formerly Fanny, right? Faye, was your name Fanny?
Yeah.
Okay, who is married to Milton Kirshner. Now, what we don't know is the origins of the senior Garbers. How they came to this country, where they came from.
Well, we talked about that last night, Jean.
Did we talk
We
about
talked about them
Lithuania?
coming from Lithuania.
Did we talk about that?
Yeah.
Not on the tape, though.
Not on the tape.
Not on the tape?
No, I don't think so.
Yes, it was.
I don't think so.
Faye, do you know what town your parents came from?
Grodnik Geber.
Grodno.
Gubernia means county or
Gubernia means the state,
Province,
like the
state.
province, yeah. So actually you say they came from Grodno.
Which was in Lithuania.
In Lithuania, which is now part of Russia.
I don't think my father was from the same.
Oh, your mother was from there?
Well, then I thought they were both from the same town. No?
I don't know.
All right, where,
That's what I've always heard.
okay, do you know, Harry, whether they both came from the same town?
I don't know.
That's what
Okay.
we were always told.
All right, and under what conditions did they migrate here? We didn't talk.
Bad.
Well, how about telling us something, Faye?
Well, my mother used to tell about the horrible story. See, my father came over earlier, and she followed. And she had Carol then as a little baby. Carol must have been about 9 months. And she tells of when they had to cross the border, they called it the Grenitz, how they hid down in, I don't know if they were in a wagon or something, they had paid to get them, they were like smuggled across the border, and they were so afraid that they would get turned back. And finally, when they made it, what a sense of relief. And the trip on the ship was over a week. And
She didn't want to get off of the boat. She enjoyed it so much.
What are you talking about? Is a month.
a month.
Yes, I was going to say a week would have been
Yeah, that
very
would have been in our days.
And they had with them some of their own food because they wouldn't eat anything non-kosher.
That's what Maury was talking about
So-
last night on the
Not
So
last
she
night, the
had
night
some
before.
kind of, I suppose what we call like salami. They had some kind of dried meat, and they took bread with them. And I asked her what other items she took with her. Why, the perronnet. The perronnet
The
is
feather quilt.
the feather quilt.
That's what we were
That
talking
was
about.
the basis for setting up a new home. And pillows.
Well, they use
And
them
her
right now.
Shabbos candlesticks.
They use them
Candle.
on
I
Sunday.
have.
Yeah, you mentioned
talked
that.
I
about
have
that
two.
last
I
night.
have
That's
two
what-
of her candlesticks, and Aunt Carol has the other two. She lit 4 of them every Friday night.
We talked about that some last
And the
night, how
father
that's what they all
brought
brought.
the prayer books.
I have a couple more.
Faye.
Yeah, what happened to
The
that
father
library
brought those
book?
prayer books with him.
Uh-huh.
What happened to
Where
them?
did they end up, you know?
Yeah, we talked about some of them. I don't know. He had a lot of them. I don't know what happened to them, but the little set of little
I
books.
think they gave them away to
we I don't think so. But the little set, I was telling them last night how that little set, do you remember those little books, Faye? They were, I don't even know what they are, but they were individual ones for various holidays and various events, and they were disintegrating when I came on the scene.
They were brown.
And we had them
The edges were
rebound.
brown.
We had them rebound. Naomi has them. But, because she rebound them, I should say. I didn't do it.
She did it
Okay.
herself.
She had it done.
Oh, she had it.
Okay, when they came over here, who did they come with? What other members of the family?
With my mother came Willie Finkel.
Oh, Willie Finkel.
Willie was the son of my mother's sister, and he was about 15, and he was due to go into the Russian army. So
Wait,
he
one,
wanted to
Debbie, do you
escape.
know who Willie Finkel is? Do you
No.
remember that they had relatives in Fairfield, Iowa? Do you remember hearing that vaguely? Okay. And do you remember hearing about a Soothalder family
Yeah.
here? Esther Soothalder is the daughter of this
Willie Finkel.
Willie Finkel, right? And she came from Fairfield, Iowa. So that was those were the only relatives that the Garber family had in this area, and that's how he
Well,
happened
he
to
came over
come.
with my mother. didn't he?
Yes, but I mean that's the only relatives they had in this.
he
in
came
this
under
area.
her tutelage.
Care, under her care,
or
yeah.
whatever.
So his family stayed behind.
He later, yeah.
His family
His
stayed
mother
in.
died in Europe. But he had a sister, Clara.
Don't talk quiet.
He had a sister, Clara, who lives in New York. And we saw her at Charla Bickman's wedding last summer.
We did?
And
Clara Rubin.
All
Clara
about her.
Rubin.
Oh, Clara Rubin.
Yeah.
Her
Oh,
daughter,
okay.
Shirley Gant.
Clara Rubin.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
We visited her. We visited Clara when Maury and I were married, and we were in the New York area. We looked up some of the old relatives, and we
Okay.
visited her too.
All right, then. And what about on your mother's side? Did
That was
anybody
on
come from
the
your
other
mother's
side
side?
Well,
Yes.
Oh, no, there's that
my
side.
mother's sister was Rosenblum.
Yeah,
and
the
they lived in
Rosenblums.
New York. I don't know just when she came.
Okay.
And she had sons. One
Right,
was
they
a
came at
dentist.
different times, all these relatives.
So we
Never
have
hear
some
from them, do
distant
you, Faye?
relatives in New York.
Uh-huh.
Have a lot
Right.
of
Really?
Because the
What are their
Rosenblums
last
had
names?
two sons and a daughter. It was Abe Rosenblum
And Morris
and
Rosenblum.
Morris
One
Rosenblum.
was
Probably
the druggist,
several hundred
one-
Abe and Morris Rosenblums
one
in New
became a-
York.
Well, I think they're both deceased now.
Yeah, it would be their
sure.
children whom we didn't know at all.
Yeah.
Poor Ron sitting through all
Oh, I
that.
love it.
Loves it. Loves it.
Okay, so then, all right, your mother and father came here at the same time, together.
No.
No, she said they
I'm-
came separately.
Oh, wait, they came separately, that's right. Your father came earlier. All right,
Yeah, earn
and
some more money to.
I don't know if we
I
talked
thought
about
they
it
were
last
over.
night, what happened to him when
They
he
said that
came.
he came separately.
What happened with him? He didn't, I think it was last night we said
Well,
he
now
didn't
listen.
like the big city, New
Now,
York.
Yeah,
no, you
that
know
was
why my
last night.
father came here to Rock Island?
Oh, maybe it'll be a different
He had a
story than you.
landsman.
We talked about, yeah.
Oh, you talked about
No,
that.
that's all right, go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
His name
tell
was
it in-
Leibowitz.
I don't remember that.
Yeah. And that's who he came to.
So he was
Okay.
already in Rock Island?
Mm-hmm. So he had an address, and when they landed in New York, at that time they were delighted for the immigrants to move on out of New York.
Didn't
Oh,
want
you
them
got a
all in New
landsman? Fine, get your ticket to Rock Island.
Yeah. Okay, so, all right, and then your mother, of course, came straight to Rock Island under those conditions, right? And she had Carol with her. Okay. Where did they live when they came here? Do you know?
Well, I was born somewhere on 22nd Street in that neighborhood.
Oh.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, Maury always told us that.
I wonder if Carol remembers the old country at all and the
She
trip
was a
over.
baby. She
No,
was 9
she
months
was-
old.
Oh,
she said.
9 months. I thought she was 9
No,
years.
no, 9 months.
Oh.
Oh.
Okay, so you lived on 22nd Street, and it wasn't until conditions had improved and your father was your father.
What was your father doing when
Yeah,
you lived
when-
on 22nd Street?
Of course, did you say he worked?
In the early days, very early days, I know he worked for John Deere or the Plow or somewhere.
Mhm.
Bowling.
And then when he was a harness maker, that was at the Arsenal.
Oh, he was a harness maker.
That's
there.
what he
the
did
war.
at the Arsenal.
Oh. Oh, so and
I didn't know he
and the
was.
clockwork at the Arsenal was an entirely different job. Uh-huh. When he repaired the clock at the Arsenal, that was a different kind of job that he did.
I don't know. They probably shifted him around. I suppose they asked him on the Arsenal, what can you do? So he told them a lot of trades that he could do, I
Oh,
suppose.
yeah.
Well, he was a harness maker, a carpenter,
Yeah.
clock repairer.
When they needed help, they
Yeah,
hire
the whole
anybody
list.
without.
He was the one who was mechanically inclined in your family, so he could tell all the things he did as a hobby, and he probably told them all the things he did as a hobby, and landed himself jobs in these different fields.
He may have fabricated a lot of his qualifications.
Okay,
As I remember him, he had a tremendous sense of humor. You know that?
is that where you guys got it?
You know that? Your
Uh-huh,
father had
Harry,
an
you
excellent sense of
you
humor.
got your sense of humor from
I
your
don't
father?
really have a special sense of humor.
Okay, so you,
Oh, yeah, they're talking
Yeah,
about how
right.
mechanical he was.
uh-huh. Okay, Faye, can you remember anything else that would go through the,
Let's hear about your mother, Faye.
yeah.
Well, my mother was a quiet woman.
She was a very sweet woman, very lovely.
She was very proud of
She
the.
had a lot of worries on her head, keeping bread on the table. She took in, we had a lot of rooms in the house. She took in boarders as a means of income. And one was Yussel, I remember him.
Sure.
Yussel.
Were these immigrants? Were these immigrants that she
Yeah.
took in?
Yeah.
Boy, had a big house.
He was a
so-
junker,
Yeah.
Not a junkie, but a
not a
junkie.
junkie.
What did he do?
And
Well,
he collected junk.
he went out in the country.
He had a truck.
Yeah, he was one of the more advanced Jews
Right.
of the time because he had a truck. Everybody else had a horse and a wagon, but he had a truck. So I remember that truck. He bought a new Model T Ford truck,
Where did he get money for that?
Who knows?
and it had solid tires on it, not pneumatic in the back. So the result of it was the shock of the solid tires was forever wrecking the rear end of the truck. So on the corner where we lived was the Brader garage, and they were always in there. He was always in there getting the rear end.
And he would go way out into the country. He'd go as far as Wilton Junction, and
further than that, he went to Dixon.
That's an island.
and sometimes we'd go along with him just for the ride because it was an opportunity.
Sure.
Maury, what
I
about the
remember
time?
that.
What about the time you had the ride with
Louis Trachtenberg.
Louis Trachtenberg?
Did you tell about that?
No, not
oh,
yet. See,
that's
there are
a good
things
one.
that
But
come
you know,
up.
we got to take our food, or stuff's
Oh,
going to get
how about
cold.
putting this on?
Well, let's hear the story.
All right, let's
and
hear the
just
story
keep
about Louis
eating
Trachtenberg.
and talking.
Well, one of the
Because you gotta
boarders,
go help yourself.
one of the boarders we had was a guy named Louis Trachtenberg. He had a coal business, and he owned several teams of horses. So he had a horse and a buggy for transportation. And I must have been 5 or 6 years old. So one day he said to my mother, "I'll take him with me to Moline when I go to visit my brother Harry Trachtenberg." So we left in the morning and rode in the buggy to Moline. And no, he didn't. He didn't tell her.
You made a mistake. He didn't tell
picked her
her.
up in Kentucky to the
He
night.
told him, "I'll take you for a ride to
She was
Moline."
worried all day. Maybe she had
No
the police looking
telephones?
for me, you know.
Maybe you were
Couldn't find me.
kidnapped.
But in Moline, I had a different kind of experience.
You remember it?
Mrs.
Yeah,
Trachtenberg
tells
was a meat and potatoes gal.
And she was
And
enormous.
I didn't like mashed
I
potatoes.
remember her.
I didn't like mashed potatoes, so she prepared a dinner with meat and lots of potatoes. And she practically forced me to eat all those potatoes.
And you didn't
anyway.
tell him how skinny you were in those days. He was like that.
But you also did not tell where different places where our mother looked for you in her frantic hunt for her lost Michelet.
Where did
We
she
had
look?
an outhouse, and she went looking there, and Casey fell down the hole. Because he was so little and so skinny.
You never told us
But she'd
that.
already looked every place else. That was the last resort. And when he wasn't there,
She thought the lie had already eaten them up.
You didn't tell us that.
Anyway, when I came home with the
I
Louis,
remember that.
then I was welcomed.
You were welcome, but Louis Trachtenberg was practically ostracized. She was so mad at him.
I don't blame
He
her.
meant well, but he didn't.
And then, did you tell this? Oh, we gotta eat. Did you tell the story how we have streetcars on Fifth Avenue,
You got to help yourself.
and because we had two different lines of streetcars were back and forth all the time, and a streetcar was considered a very, very dangerous menace to little children. And we had no fenced-in yard or anything like that. We did have a little stoop, a front porch, and our two brothers were so well behaved that when they would go out of the house, and my mother would say, "You stay on the porch," the two of them would hold hands and they'd sit there and stay on that porch. They
He let
did.
me hold his
They really
hand?
did, both
Why
of
would they
you.
hold hands?
You'd
So you wouldn't run away.
So one would, you know.
Oh,
Can you see kids doing that nowadays?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
All right,
All right,
put it on.
stop.
You recording it? Yeah. Okay, so
Maury wants to tell a story that I reminded him that he was used to tell the little ones about, which I think is indicative of the times too. Tell him about it, Maury.
Well, there used to be a big factory called Rock Island Fashion Doorworks, about a block from our house.
Go ahead.
talk louder. Talk louder.
There used to be a factory about a block from our house called the Rock Island Fashion Doorworks. And there they used to discard what was called knots from the lumber.
No.
And I would go there and pick it up and bring it home, and my mother would put it in the stove on Friday when she would bake bread because the knots would make a very hot fire. And that was my job every Friday to go pick up the knots.
You can take a small one.
What did she use for fuel in the stove other than that? Coal.
She used coal. And if anybody doesn't know what coal is, you'll have to bring you a sample sometime.
It's all right. The little kids, the grandchildren today want to know what's coal. They really have never seen coal.
Most homes don't use it.
Debbie, you
Oh,
said
God.
you never saw coal, didn't you? Who said
Well,
that?
I've seen it on a boxcar, but I've never actually
Oh.
picked up a piece of coal.
That's
Where
what
would I
mean.
have
Where would
coal?
you have the opportunity?
And was this a pot-belly stove, or what kind of stove was it? It was big range
Hot belly
top
stoves are
stove.
heating stoves.
And every Thursday, my mother would bake her challah. And she made such a tremendous amount in a great big, I think like you can visualize a baby bath, that big a container. And to let it rise, she'd set it on the stove, to the back of the stove, and she'd cover it with her big feather down pillow to keep it warm and help it to rise.
I don't remember
Tell us some more about your mother. We got interrupted before.
Well,
We had a wash tub in the kitchen. And every Friday was bath day. And as little kids, we would take turns getting in the bathtub, and my mother would pour warm water and give us a bath. That was a Friday ritual.
I remember and this is later years, of course, when I was on the scene, on Saturday afternoon, she always sat and read and studied from her prayer book, which was the
Tchina.
The Tchina. That was the Yiddish version of the Siddur, of the Hebrew prayer book. But the women in those days could not read the Hebrew, and they certainly couldn't read the English. There wasn't much available in English in those days. So they had the Tchina, and they would sit around the kitchen table and, in effect, study, read, and go over and over the things every Saturday afternoon. She was doing them, but because, of course, she did no work of any sort on Saturday.
And there was standard policy with her that we were not allowed to talk Yiddish with her. She'd say, talk English, otherwise I'll never learn. And so we would automatically try to remember to talk only English with her.
Yeah, but we didn't practice that very much.
Well, to some extent.
So you spoke Yiddish mostly at home?
Their family had the most beautiful Yiddish I've ever heard in my life. We spoke Yiddish at home to a certain extent. Like I spoke with my grandparents, I spoke Yiddish, but in our home we spoke mostly English. But when I came to Rock Island, there were some Yiddish words I had never heard. I always told you that, they had the most beautiful Yiddish I've ever heard. And they conversed a lot in Yiddish at home. A lot.
my parents used Yiddish in order not to let us know what they're talking about.
Oh yeah, that was
And
standard
then,
practice.
when I took German, in school, I learned to talk to my grandma in Yiddish because the languages are so similar. And then, of course, my parents couldn't use Yiddish, they used Russian. And then pretty soon I got the intonations of the Russian and all that. So that didn't work too well
By
for
the
them
time you were in
either.
high school, they weren't
Yeah.
hiding too much from you anyhow.
Well, I don't know.
Another thing I was very proud of, my mother, she taught herself to read. Of course, it was very limited, but just from the headlines of the newspaper. And then later years, her eyes were not that good, and she didn't have good prescription glasses. She couldn't read the small print. But she would always manage to know what was going on by at least reading the headlines and the sub-headlines.
Say, we heard last night about Harry starting, how he got into playing the violin and how he obtained a violin. He told us those stories last night. But how did you get started playing the piano?
Oh, yeah.
Well, Aunt Carol
Yeah.
went to work at the age of 15.
How
And-
far did she go in school?
And she must have gone, well, how far did
Just
a
through 8th
15-year-old
grade.
get?
8th grade.
I don't know if she had 1 year of high school.
No,
even.
8th grade would be after 14 usually.
And she would have even quit earlier to go to work,
Mhm.
but she was so small.
Oh,
So
she
you
was?
had to lie
You mean she was
to
short?
get jobs. She was thin, she was short, you know, okay. So
What about Mary? How far did she go to school?
she didn't go regular school much further, but she went to Brown's Business College.
Oh, that's how she was able to work for Ben Harris. We talked about that last
She
night.
learned typing and shorthand.
Where's your cup?
But to get back to this business of piano, when Carol started working,
Yeah.
one of her early paychecks went for a down payment to buy a piano.
Oh.
I don't
And-
remember that.
Yeah,
Did you take lessons?
Was that because she wanted it, or was it for you?
It was a status symbol
Yes,
or something.
yes,
and,
that's true.
And since I was available, I was the one to get the lessons first.
Well, I remember they brought in all the neighbors to see the piano.
Oh, of course. And shortly after we
So
got
how
our
many people had a
piano,
piano?
then Mrs. Lerman got a piano, Mrs. Gerwitz got a piano, Mrs. Obolsky got a piano. Oh,
But you were the first one
I was
of
the
that
first
bunch.
one.
So you were delegated to learn piano because you were the youngest.
She wasn't,
Probably.
she wasn't working,
You
and she
weren't
was
working.
I was in
available.
school. I was 9 years old,
Mhm.
and my sister's paychecks went to pay the piano.
Who paid for your violin lessons, Shirley? The mother. Was that also, did the rest of the family
Oh,
contribute to his violin
and when
lessons?
Carol would have a date, which she frequently had,
Yeah,
she
Carol
was a
very
good-looking woman.
attractive.
In those days, I guess that was the way it was done, that the beau had to be entertained while she was still getting dressed or whatever.
You couldn't be too anxious, so you couldn't be ready when the boyfriend would show up.
So I
that
was
was the
sent into
idea.
the living room to play the piano.
That was entertainment.
That was entertainment. I didn't know from nothing. I'd go and play.
That could have drove away some guys.
Very good, Harry.
Driven. Watch your grammar.
Just talking.
And then the music teacher
Right.
that I had then became the music teacher for Dorothy Lerman and Adele Lerman and Sarah Gerwitz. I brought
She brought her a lot of business, huh?
Did you discount because of that? None of them turned out to be concert pianists.
Dorothy is still a very, very good player.
Is it?
Dorothy
Yeah.
plays jazz.
Oh.
And her home in South Bend, she's the pianist for everything that goes on the way Jeanette Nittickman used to be the player. And Dorothy tells a story.
Well, Dorothy wound up as a piano teacher for a long time also. She had students.
But did I tell you that Dorothy and Dave Brabitsky were here a couple weeks ago? And I had them, what did I have them for, brunch?
Yeah,
No.
but our
Dinner.
Dinner.
progeny will
Oh.
not be interested.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm forgetting.
Trying to point.
Yeah.
So your parents were basically encouraging as far as the children.
Oh, yeah. My
Studying
mother
music?
particularly. Oh, she'd always said, whatever you learn, you'll never forget. You'll always
You'll
have
always
it.
be there.
Well, anyway, I'll tell you about my earliest business.
Oh,
career.
yes.
One day in the mail, there came a box of chewing gum.
This is going to end soon.
I
All right,
must
make
have
it
been
quick.
5 or 6 years old. What did you say?
Quick, it's
That's all right.
So the name of the gum was Yucatan.
Oh, I remember that.
Remember that? Yeah.
So,
Had a pink wrapper.
so who sent the gum? We don't know. But anyway, we had a box of chewing gum in one hand. So my mother said, why don't you go outside and sell it for a nickel a package? So I stood in front of the house, and lo and behold, I sold that box of chewing gum very quickly at a nickel a package. So that gave us an idea. I went to a wholesaler and I bought a box of chewing gum, and I went, stationed myself in front of a drugstore down the street, and I sold chewing gum there. And it sold. I was, very, very gratified that I made some money. So then I advanced from there to a position downtown where there were more people. And I was buying chewing gum and had a regular business out of it. But at that place on 20th Street, the man that ran the drugstore, he didn't like that I was out in front taking away some of his business.
There for
So
competition.
he tried to run me away. Well, anyway, from there I progressed to selling candy. And up until the time I was almost a senior in high school, I had a regular route. And I sold candy and I made a lot of money. And it helped pay my way through college.
Wow.
And,
He didn't make enough
Harry,
money.
he tried to sell candy in Davenport. But in Davenport, they picked him up, the police picked him up for not having a permit. So they sent the patrol wagon and they took him down to the
So they took him to the police station.
And there they questioned him, he's got to have a permit. So they let him out and he came home and he never went back to Davenport since to sell candy.
That's a nice story. Yeah, the Garber kids were very enterprising. That was very obvious. Now, another facet of the Garber personality was the family concern for each other. And I think this was brought out very clearly to me years ago when I heard about how they all took care of their parents when they were ill. And I really would like to hear you talk about that a little more. But Faye's way over there. And I wanted to...
Not that important.
Yes, it is important. I think our posterity should know about your concern for your parents and how you took care of them when they were sick.
I started last night, after the tape was over last night, I started saying my memory of their father because he was ill when I came on the scene.
Who was ill first? Your father?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, he had a stroke.
Faye,
He lived for 5 years with his
talk
stroke.
about your father.
His left side felt like needles and pins for 5 years.
Well, I understand that Harry used to wait on him and take him out for rides and so on.
And I used to shave him.
You used to shave him?
Yeah, Faye said just now that Harry was in effect like a nurse, both of them. I mean, both
That's
Harry
right.
and Maury. And Harry bathed him every day, or whatever. I don't know if he said, anyhow, he bathed him. And Maury shaved him. They took him for rides.
And I was working at the Arsenal at the time, and when I would come home from work, the first thing that I would do would go into his bedroom and we would play a game of checkers.
Oh, he loved checkers. Even I did it when I came. I forgot.
And, you know, all
I
day,
don't remember that.
with
Forgot.
time on his hands, he'd look forward, he'd look at the clock, it's time for Faye to come home. And I'll have Adam, you called it, the game was called Adam, D-O-M, to play a game of
You know what
checkers.
else he liked to do that I remember? He used to like to collect the coupons from Raleigh cigarette. Wasn't it Raleigh?
Yeah.
Raleigh cigarettes. And Harry would open up the cartons of cigarettes to put the individual packages out for sale. And in each carton there were these coupons. So he would bring them to his father. And that was his job. He was collecting. Remember, Faye?
Well, he
counted them and went over and over. But do you know he accumulated, over the years, he accumulated quite a few of
I
them.
remember those.
Do you remember
coupons.
them?
Still have them.
Yeah.
But do you know, I don't know what they're doing now, but they gave away all kinds of premiums for these things.
I remember those things.
But do you know what he did when Maury and I were married? He wanted to give us his own gift. And I still remember
Oh, that I don't remember.
he redeemed the coupons that he had to that day at that point, and he got us an electric iron. That was from him.
I didn't remember that.
I do. I remember it. Yeah. Good. I'll just tell you, he was a lovely guy. When I came on the scene, he was already bedridden for about 4 years. And when I got to know the Garbers pretty well, I was teaching school at Davenport at the time. But when I got to know them, first I knew Faye, first I met Maury and then Faye. But I was invited for Shabbos dinner almost every Friday night. I was invited for Shabbos dinner at their home. So, as Faye said that she would go see her father every day and play checkers, I used to get flowers from the kids, or different things they'd bring in, and whatever I had, I used to save it, and when I would come on Friday, I would bring it to him. And he was so delighted with whatever flowers, or it could have been the least little nothing. If I didn't have anything, I'd manage to get something in order to bring it to him. But he was just so delighted with everything. And if you just sat and talked with him for 5 minutes, it was just as though you were just wonderful. And I remember how you used to bring him into the living room, in that big chair in the living room, so he could sit there and be with everybody. Remember? And so that was part of my memory.
He had one habit, though, that used to drive my mother nuts.
All right, what was that?
He loved to break out walls.
Break out walls.
You mean in his earlier days?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Well, we're talking. No,
I know, but we're sort of backtracking anyhow as we think of things. We had our upstairs was
Boy, sounds like you, Maury, with the breaking of walls.
2 small bedrooms that Carol and Mary
Well, you're
shared.
not presenting it right, Faye.
Well, it comes
What do you mean he loved to break out walls?
Oh.
He didn't break walls indiscriminately.
No, of course
He
not.
was
but-
improving the house.
Right. But,
Mary and Carol had 2 little bedrooms
yeah,
upstairs.
he made one big bedroom.
Neither one was much, so he took out a wall and made one big beautiful.
In other words, it was a
bedroom.
big improvement. It
Big
was.
improvement.
That's
Not-
the room we later
not
used. It was a
just
beautiful room.
removing walls indiscriminately.
Yeah,
Whoa.
but he wouldn't give Ma any advance
It's the one where the roof didn't
notice
take
that he was going to do it. All of a sudden she hears banging, banging, and a wall is coming down, and she doesn't know what's going
Yeah,
on.
you're exaggerating.
No, I can remember.
Don't fight,
didn't get her
kids. Don't
permission.
argue, kids.
And the same thing was true in the kitchen when he had to break out the walls to put in the bathroom. And here she's in the middle of her baking or cooking, and all of a sudden he's knocking on a wall.
That's all right. His son Morris does the
Are
same
you sure he
thing.
didn't get her permission?
And then, of course, sometimes the work would be held
Say,
up.
don't talk there.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sometimes the work would be held up for a long time because they didn't have the money to buy the materials. But he went ahead and got started. And there she was in the mess. That's what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
But
Don't fight, kids.
Well, he meant well.
yeah. Oh, he had wonderful ideas. He put all the plumbing in.
No, I don't
They
think
took
he
out the
did.
gas.
I
line.
always tell about having
No,
Mel
you're wrong
McKay.
again,
You
Faye.
see, you're wrong on that,
He
Faye.
did not put in the plumbing. When we had plumbing put in the kitchen, he and I went up in the attic and dismantled some soil pipe, which was in the way or something. And then we called McKay to come and put it together.
McKay was a plumber.
McKay. So when they came, they saw half of the work was done. It was all in pieces. All we had to do was rebuild, whatever we wanted to do there. So, but he didn't put in the plumbing. It was against
Well,
the law. He couldn't get
No,
by with
but
it
I mean, he
anyway.
put the partitions up for the room. And
That's not
and all
plumbing.
Yeah, you had to get a permit.
So it's interesting that as a result of this exposure to a handy father, that Faye married a man who has all those
In
qualifications
later years, I got Evelyn.
That's what I was looking for.
Gene, in later years, I got Evelyn mad at me.
What did I do now?
The only time that ever happened.
We had a Bendix washer in the kitchen,
That was the first automatic
and the
washer.
Oh, the
Bendix
first.
was a
What, you mean a clothes washer?
clothes washer.
Right.
It was so designed that it would vibrate and shake, so you had to anchor it to the floor with some big screws.
Well, you better tell that there was no place to put the washer
Yeah.
except in the kitchen.
So it vibrated so much that the screws pulled out of the wood. So how do you solve that kind of problem? I decided to pour a slug of concrete between the joists
In my kitchen.
and then anchor the washer to that. So when did I decide to have that done?
Took
There
after
was
his father.
There was a young black guy next door I hired him to mix the concrete, you know. But when did I bring him in? Shortly after, she scrubbed the floor.
Boy. Just like your father, I'm telling you.
So
It
we
was the
came
same.
in and we made a mess.
You still remember, huh? Getting scolded. Well, the cake is delicious.
Oh,
it sure is.
Yeah, so, anyway, I think we've kind of covered
Now, let's change the subject.
I'm sure we haven't scratched the surface. But
no.
You know, there's another little thing I just wanted to mention in passing. We talked last night quite a bit about the liquor business, how it got started, and all the details, and the fact that when Harry was in the Army, that Maury, I don't know if we mentioned that Maury was running the liquor store and working at Ordnance Steel Foundry in Bettendorf at the same time. But during that period,
Taking care of the store.
I was just going to tell you, as it happened, my parents lived in Chicago at the time. My father was having trouble with his eyesight, and it was difficult for him to do very much, but he had been in retailing a good part of his life. Maury had him come out to Rock Island, and he worked in the store. My father worked in the liquor store for quite a period of time. And he would go back to Chicago every once in a while, or my mother would come out once in a while. It was good for him, and it helped them also, because in the meantime, Maury could keep up with his job. That this job at Ordnance Steel Foundry kept him out of the Army, and because it was defense work, so it kept him out of the Army. And
I think I helped in the stores too.
were you around then, or were you in
Yeah,
Chicago? And I
Margaret
think you
Jackson
were
was.
on. I know she did in earlier times, but I mean, I didn't remember at that period. After we were married, you were living in Chicago, Faye. You were
No, but
working
prior
for.
to that,
I know, but I'm talking about the period of the war. You were working for the Immigration Naturalization Department then, weren't you?
How do you remember that?
Chicago.
In Chicago, yeah, because I know the only ones that were home. I mean, Harry was the only one that was home besides Maury. And then, of course, Maury would be in the store in the evenings. And so that's how it was kept going.
Tell them about the alarm system they set
Oh,
up.
yeah, they set up. Maury told how he pulled the wires through it, whatever you did to get the buzzer system. And that 3 things meant you better call the police. There's a holdup. 3 buzzes.
Mm-hmm.
You ever
Yeah.
have to use that buzzer?
What?
You know
Did you ever
that
have to use the buzzer for it?
Well, I think one time
you mean for the
did.
holdup?
You did, because you had a young guy working for you. I've forgotten his name. He rang the buzzer. He was
By
a Jewish
accident?
kid. No, not. He really rang it.
Yeah.
And you called the police, or we did. And the kid said he was just held up. They took whatever it was for
Otherwise,
him.
there's a hot one.
Are you listening, Faye? So he rang the buzzer, and we came running in, and the police came, and they said he was held up. So under questioning, what was his name?
Doesn't matter, just tell
Yeah,
the story.
Under questioning, the
Tommy Uncle.
holdup was a hoax.
That's what I
He needed money.
How did we discover
Why
that?
did he need money? It was found out he had contracted a venereal disease.
Is that the kind of help you had, Harry?
We didn't examine them
He
carefully.
needed money for the treatments.
That's funny.
His father used to work for Gibberman's, I know that.
Well, it doesn't matter, Maury.
Remember his
He
name.
wasn't Jewish, was he?
Yeah,
he was Jewish.
doesn't
Wasn't
matter.
Goldfarb, was it?
No, don't start
That doesn't make
guessing.
any
It doesn't
difference.
matter
Yeah.
what the name
It
was.
doesn't make any difference. In all the years that we were married, I think you were only held up once.
No, more than once.
More than once?
Yeah.
Now, Debbie, you
think
tell
3
us what you
times.
remember.
Yeah,
No, I don't remember the
checks, I know
details.
that.
I just remember
You
when
know-
that Mr. Haney was in the store and they took his wallet. And you were always told to help, never to have a gun. That you didn't want any guns in the store. Why should, they'll just use it to shoot somebody. So, anyway, I just remember you've had people swiping bottles off the shelf. But I only remember the one robbery.
You know, that old house on Fifth Avenue was quite a place. It was really old, and I never did figure out. Did you ever figure out how old the structure actually was
One
at the
time
time?
I saw the
when it was.
abstract.
Did you when it was built?
Went back.
I was describing
To the
to them.
Indians.
I was describing to them
That's
last
right.
night the way the house was built in terms of the colonnades, and I had forgotten that your father built those colonnades.
I'll tell you, when he
But
moved the house away, there was a little fortune of money hidden away in a crack. When I was little, whenever I'd get a hold of a penny, there was a little crack in the floor that led into some subterranean
So we didn't have a bank.
recess.
Oh, did you get the pennies back?
And I would keep shoving pennies in there.
What happened to them?
Well, when the house was moved, the pennies went.
Pennies went with it. But you know, this...
Henry Pizer got them.
It's a good thing it was only pennies.
The old milk, remember?
That's right. That was his name.
Yeah.
You know, I was telling you about the living room and the dining and the colonnades and all that. The kitchen was huge. It was really a...
Because my
That
father
was
knocked out a
like-
wall.
I was just going to say because he had enlarged it. There was, but what they didn't say last night, that off of the kitchen was what we would have called a pantry. You know what a pantry is? You know, you go into a regular little closet. But on the floor of that pantry,
Oh.
see, on the floor of that pantry was a huge trapdoor. And you picked up the trapdoor, and there were steps going
the
down
cellar.
there to the cellar. It was, to me, when I first saw
It was
that,
a whole...
I came from Chicago, from the big city. I never saw anything like that before. It was really like a hole in the ground. And a very low ceiling, a tall person, you would have to walk stooped over completely, Ron. And it,
I walked stooped over
all
down
right,
there.
okay. It was a very, very low ceiling. But down there is where their mother kept her canned goods. I mean, she made all kinds of, you know, she
That was
put
in
things
another
up.
little room.
That was a different room.
There
But
used to be a stone wall, and then my father built an addition to the kitchen. So to get in access under there, he took out some of the old stone. And that was really shallow. And we had an old cabinet
oh,
there.
yeah, I remember that other room.
And all the
Had
jellies
crawling crack.
went in there.
And
Yeah, well,
that's
that
where, isn't that where
But
the
the
jug
poor-
of, isn't
the
that where the
poor-
jug of Vishnik was?
Oh, that
Oh,
was
the
good.
Ah.
And when she would make kraut, that was
Oh,
where
wait,
the
you
big
forgot about the business?
crock
You made
of
it.
kraut.
Your
Ooh,
mother.
that stink.
She made it.
With that smell of the house.
Oh, tell about the Vishnik. Debbie, you had that Vishnik.
Yeah.
Debbie and Ron, you both had the Vishnik. Tell about the Vishnik you had the other night.
Well,
Well,
who
yeah,
made
tell
it? Who
about-
made it more? You can tell.
Well, my mother was going to make some Vishniks,
Is that against the law?
and I furnished her a jar, a gallon jug.
It's a brandy. It's like a
And
brandy.
the gallon jug was an empty jug from whiskey,
Longwood.
an early whiskey that
Longwood.
Harry sold in the store. The name was Longwood. So she put in the cherries, and
Tell them what it said on the label, the Longwood label.
on the label it said, "This whiskey is less than 30 days old." The reason it was labeled that way, the government had a rule, a law, that every whiskey must bear on the label the age of the whiskey, so people would know what they're buying.
This was right after Prohibition.
Since this was right after repeal
Yeah.
of Prohibition, whiskeys didn't have a chance to get aged very much. The demand was tremendous, and they couldn't age it even if they wanted to. People were too thirsty. So the distilleries put on the label, this whiskey is less than 30 days old, and that satisfied the government, the legality of
They
it.
wanted the truth on the age.
Yeah, but now the whiskey, now the Vishnik that Debbie and Ron had the other night was not the original. Tell what
The
happened
cherries are the
to
original.
it. The cherries.
in
All right,
there.
tell what happened to it.
Well, over the years,
Do you know what kind of cherries they were?
What do you mean?
The cherries that this Vishnik was made from it came from North Africa. It's these Dalmatian dried cherries.
How do you
Oh.
know?
Because my mother used to make them too.
Oh,
Yeah, my father used to make it
Sure.
too.
I didn't know they used
remember how
that.
to make the milk?
No,
Let's make
but
one
Everybody,
together.
all of
they
them
came
did
from
it.
North Africa.
My parents
They
never
were
did.
dried cherries, absolutely dry. You squeeze one, you wouldn't get any. Wouldn't even your fingers
Yeah.
wouldn't even get red.
That's right.
They would soak it in this pure alcohol, and by the time it aged, it was something else.
Knocked it on your
It
ear.
wasn't
Well-
dried cherries.
Well, when we found the jug, when we built our house in Hillcrest Court, and we were sorting and moving and trying to think what to save and what to leave, and what, you know, when some things weren't worth doing anything with, But Maury found the jug of Vishnik. Is that about when you found it? I can't remember if it was before or
It was
after.
about half full, I believe.
And it was at least half
Well, we
full.
drained some off over the years.
I'm sure. But tell them what you did afterwards in order to keep the Vishnik.
That's what I was
Well,
referring to.
I bought a half a pint of 190 proof grain alcohol and put it in there. And that improved the quality quite a bit.
Joe Wolf told him to do that because they used to do that in the old
It
country
also
in
restocked the
Czechoslovakia.
jug.
Keep the
And
smell.
it is delicious now. You can vouch for it, isn't it?
It's very good.
Uh-huh.
Very
Okay,
smooth.
so much for the
So you have
Vishnik.
to keep adding alcohol to it all the time.
Well, we didn't know.
Because
We
the
never
alcohol-
had
even
Vishnik.
when it's stoppered, the alcohol evaporates right through the stopper.
Also, that stopper doesn't really, it's not an
No.
airtight seal.
Well, it helps quite a bit, though.
And with all this background in liquors and Vishnik and what have you, Harry never wanted to claim to be an authority on wine, so he always avoided when customers came in and they wanted advice on certain things. He could only tell what would sell because he hadn't the vaguest idea what they really tasted like because he wasn't a drinker. Neither was I. And we ended up with an accumulation of bottles in our garage that have either the tax sticker torn or the label off or something like that, where it didn't pay to send it back to the distributor or to the
Also, you
distiller.
bring it home.
Yeah, so we got this accumulation from the year one. We
And they
had
would
more
just
stuff.
evaporate in the
It just
bottle.
evaporates.
We still have any of
What a
that?
waste.
We have loads of stuff left.
We have that
Besides, I
collection
bought some.
of miniature bottles. You know, the miniature bottles, and most of them are nearly gone from evaporation.
Really?
Over the
We have a
years.
few of those.
The seals
too.
aren't broken; they've just
Uh-huh, they
evaporated.
evaporate.
I remember
yes.
one time on the
That's
Fifth
why
Avenue
Vishnik got
store,
so thick.
Harry and I decided to taste a bottle of wine. Oh, what was it?
Well, it doesn't matter.
I was going to say zucchini. It sounded not zucchini.
Zinfandel?
Zinfandel, yeah.
How do you know that?
So we opened the bottle, and Harry took a taste, and he screwed up his face. I took a taste, and I said it tastes like iodine. So we dumped it out or something. But today I wouldn't dump it out. I'd say it's good wine.
Well, now his taste buds are trained so he can drink sherry and Chablis and Rhine wine, right? Same as me.
That's enough.
That's
Oh, and
enough,
Kahlua
huh?
once. We haven't had any Kahlua in ages. I have an unopened bottle, I think.
You know, in back of the old house was another structure. First of all, there was a porch off the old house, attached to the old house, I mean. And Maury, you used to tell what your mother used to do when she would fix a goose.
Oh, in those days, she used to use for fat, chicken fat, goose fat,
Oh,
any kind of poultry fat, you know.
Yeah, spots.
So, like when it come around Thanksgiving time, want to buy a goose, she'd pick out the fattest goose she could find, and she'd hang it up on the porch. There was like a little cabinet there, a high-level cabinet. It was my job to hang up the goose from the neck,
You always had the
and they leave it hang in the cold weather, and the fat would settle down, and then
Oh,
they'd
really?
open it up and take out the fat. And those were in the days when there was no cholesterol.
Yeah, there was no cholesterol.
And also that porch served a purpose before Passover, when she would get her house all cleaned out
For Pesach.
Pesach, everything from the kitchen eventually wound up
All the chametz stuff.
on that back porch, and we were practically living in an empty kitchen because
It was
everything
all ready
was-
for Pesach.
Yeah. Oh, what she went through for Pesach.
Well, that's what everybody did then.
Yeah, I think my daughter-in-law
And
Debbie
they-
still does it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I
And
I
the,
would take some nails and drive them in the cabinets and knock and
Oh, yeah. So you
and then
couldn't.
nail them.
I
to the
used to
door.
tie up our cabinets when our kids were
I
little.
used to nail them.
Well, I didn't go that far.
That's the
but
only sure way to get
ours were
locked,
metal
keep
in
it
those
locked.
days. We could have nailed them if we wanted to. So you wouldn't make a mistake and go in.
And then, did you mention where we had the barn?
I was just going to talk about the
Oh.
barn. Go ahead.
Well, one of the boarders, did you talk about Mr. Satin?
No, go
You
ahead.
remember Sam Satin? Well, his father was
Shy.
lived in 2 back rooms, also attached to the house, but in back of it.
That was after he was divorced, wasn't it?
He was never divorced.
Mr. Satin? You didn't keep up with things.
I don't remember that he got a divorce.
Go on,
Anyhow,
talk about it.
he had a horse and wagon in the barn. So our kids always had a horse around.
They lived across the alley.
Yeah, but when he lived in those two back rooms, he had his horse there in our barn.
Right in the city?
This was after he was
Sure.
divorced.
Oh,
Really
yeah,
argue
that's
about such
everybody does.
details.
Anyway, regardless, we ran into Jimmy Gartelis at Eagles one
I ran into
day,
him at Eagles too.
and he started in telling stories of their childhood.
In Yiddish, too.
Yeah, he speaks Yiddish too. He's a Greek who speaks Yiddish.
There's a few words.
But anyway, he was telling all kinds of stories, and he was telling about a cow. Remember,
Mrs.
Harry?
Finkelstein's cow or
Satins had a
Mrs.
cow,
Satin's
yeah.
cow?
And he thought that it was your cow, your family's cow. It wasn't.
Satins.
I'll set
Okay.
him straight on that.
And then, of course,
next time I see
he was
him.
telling some of those stories about some of the pranks you kids did
Oh, yeah.
when you were little.
Oh,
What was that
okay.
story
He
about the
embellishes them every
restaurant?
time. Oh, about going by the restaurant.
Yeah, wait,
one time
I want
when
to, I
you-
remember the
was
story,
telling
but
you
let
about
Harry
that?
tell about it. Harry, remember when you went by a restaurant, the kids were, and the door was open and it was
Oh, yeah,
winter?
that's,
You remember that?
what was the name of that?
It was a Mills
It was on
Cafe, I
Mills
think.
Mills Cafe.
Yeah, it was, Mills Cafe was
Cafe.
It wasn't?
They wouldn't dare do it.
Well, that was
Mills
on
My
Cafe.
God.
24th Street.
Mills
And 24th
Cafe was a prostitute.
Yeah.
There was a restaurant on 20th.
Let Harry
Street.
tell
Well,
about it.
anyways, we don't.
Well, anyways,
Doesn't matter
so
which one.
I and this other kid, whoever it was, decided one of us will open the door and the other one will throw in a snowball. So I think I'm the one who opened the door as somebody threw the snowball, and it had like a counter there. You know, those restaurants with counters. It landed in the case.
In his soup?
And then what happened?
The guy chased us. He finally caught
You,
me.
you said he had a butcher knife in his hand when he chased you.
I think he did have a knife. And oh, was he angry.
Oh, you guys
But
did
I
all
didn't-
kinds of
We
things.
didn't bother him anymore.
So you denied that you were the guy.
I don't remember.
I got the
He chased me. I knew I was involved in it.
What about how you said there used to be pigeons in the loft of the barn, too?
Oh, in the days when we rented out the barn for horses, you know, there was corn around, and there were pigeons around, and I decided to have a pigeon loft up there in the barn. So I made a couple of holes in the wall, got an orange crate, and I was hoping that the pigeons would move in, but they didn't move in.
Didn't put up a sign.
So that boarder of mine told me, well, he'll bring me some baby pigeons and keep them in the box until they grow up. And then when they fly, they'll always come back. That's their home. So that's what I did. But, so that's
Did they
how-
come back then? Did you have them then? Or did-
Oh, yeah, they multiplied, you know.
And they didn't just fly away and leave, huh?
Fruitful and multiplied.
Yeah, they believed it.
Oh. So you never, did you send messages with them?
They weren't
That's a
that
different type.
They were
of
homing
bird.
pigeons. They were home. Those are homing.
That'd be a homing
What
pigeon.
else did you do in the early days? I understand that barn was used for people who had horses, who happened to be a boarder or whatever. But then, as time went on, there were no more boarders and there were no more horses. So, what was the barn used for?
Kind of fell apart, I think.
No. Harry, what did you use the barn for then? In later
I don't know if
use?
it was renting it out or what.
No, didn't
Oh,
you
yeah.
use it for
Used it
storage?
for storage of your bottles.
Put it in a bottle.
From the
Beer,
bottles.
beer cases, you mean? The cases that were going to be picked up by the drivers. That was a storage place, because you didn't have a big warehouse in the back, did you, at the
No,
old
not
store?
at first.
No,
And we
in
had
the old,
an
I'm talking
addition.
about the little store, the old
Yeah.
store, way back.
Right.
Whoever gave you the impression, whoever suggested to you that you should invest in property in Rock Island?
I didn't invest in property.
Yes, he did.
You,
Well, I
you and Al
bought some.
Hellman.
When did you get friendly with Al Handelman? Was that
Lou
when you opened the
Weissman.
Liberty?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah,
that
Lou
the time, Lou
Weissman.
Weissman?
They
And,
got off for what?
yeah, is that when you first became friendly with Al and
No.
Lou? I know, you were a threesome. You went out to lunch every day together.
Just about, yeah.
And I guess you invested in property together too, didn't you,
Yeah.
all three of you?
Yeah.
Remember the Tucker Building in Clinton? Where you did
Yeah.
that with Friedmans too. Ben and
Yeah, Friedman's were in
Is he
there.
Friedman?
I think and Al was in there and myself.
Louis Weissman.
Yeah, that's right. Louis.
The fivesome. Yeah, that was kind of an interesting social thing too. We women would get to go out for dinner sometimes with them in nice restaurants, which we didn't do otherwise.
You had corporate meetings.
Harry, do you
Huh?
remember
Yeah.
one time Faye came to borrow your car?
Oh, that was funny. Yeah, that's a funny
And
story. That's another one.
she drove away with a car.
Who gave her the key?
Then Al Handelman discovered that somebody stole his car.
The keys fit both cars.
Dude, that was strange.
Oh,
I drove off with it. I didn't know the
Drove off with Al Handelman's car.
Yeah, I mean, a car's a car as long as it goes.
You know,
And then
was
he
it
called
really-
police. He called the police, didn't he?
I don't know. That's scary.
No, I don't think
Yeah,
so.
he thinks he
I
did.
think we did call the police. It was stolen. In the meantime, she came back with her car, so I called back not to look for it.
I'd forgotten that.
You know,
You took Al's car instead of Harry's car?
They were the same
Same
color.
color.
Oh.
let me tell you something about my wife. To this day, she looks at the license to make sure she's got our car.
You should put a
You learned a
bicycle.
lesson.
You should put a bicycle rack on the back of your car like we have, and then you
I
can
didn't know
pick
you
it
had
out
one.
anywhere.
She doesn't know.
One car from another.
I look for MG.
That little bike rack, it has been our lifesaver on big parking lots, for Maury's bike. And
Oh.
these two prongs stick up there, and we can pick it out.
Okay, let's see, what's
Oh,
the day?
follow
October
line.
19th, 1985. And we're now at the home of the Morris Garbers, 19 Hillcrest Court, Rock Island, Illinois.
Tell them who's here.
Morris Garber, Evelyn Glazer Garber,
Oh, she remembered.
Harry Garber, Jean Bender Garber, Deborah Gale Garber, and Ronald Mark Miska.
I never did know
garb?
his last
What's your last name, Ron?
Miska.
Miska.
Miska. How do you spell it?
M-I-S-K-A.
Just the way it
thought
sounds. Just the way it sounds. Yeah. Well, anyway, it's been fun reminiscing about the past, and of course, for posterity, we have to record it somehow. So, one of the things that our grandchildren certainly would want to know is, how did Grandpa, who is a violinist, get started with the violin, and how did he become a liquor store owner? Which is so different.
Tell us about the violin, Harry. How did you start playing
I
violin?
gotta think.
What about the guy that came to your house?
Well,
He was selling lessons, wasn't
they said you take violin lesson. I think it was $1 a lesson for 1 year. That's $48, and at the end of the year, you get to keep the violin.
So this is just some guy who came to your house?
Well, it was. They were going house to house.
Yeah.
But they had a room where they had 2 or 3 teachers, and the kids would all come in, and it sounded terrible. And I mean, terrible is not the right word. Imagine a teacher didn't know what he was doing, and the kids knew less. And they were sawing away. That's what they call violin playing, is sawing. Well, anyways, I figured you had to take it for a year, and I was ready to quit after about 6 or 8 lessons. Then I decided, no, I might as well wait till the year's up and I'll get the violin. And the violin wasn't worth anything anyways. But I stuck it out for the year, and then I went to a private teacher, and I had to undo all the things I learned.
he? Was that Mr. Klein?
No, client came afterwards.
Wait, how old were you?
I don't know.
He was about 10 or 12.
No, I was older than that.
So that was about 1920.
I have no idea how many years ago it was. But anyways, I I finally went to a private teacher, and then it was an awful time to try to unlearn what I learned, what I picked up doing everything wrong. So then I got a regular, good, he was a pretty good teacher. But so if you get in the habits, for instance, when you hold the violin, you hold it like this, straight. So it fits better under the neck of the violin like this. So if you do that for about a year, it's hard to undo because you're not used to playing with your hand like this when you're used to playing it like this.
Well, that's quite a different angle, isn't it? Straight up or right angle.
What made you stick it out? I mean, after the year, did you like it? Did you find it?
Well, yeah, I kind of enjoyed it. So at the end of the year, the violin was mine. Then I went to a private teacher.
And did you enjoy practicing too?
Well, I don't know if there's anything to really enjoy about it. They give you a certain amount of satisfaction if you know that you're getting better every month or so.
When did you acquire the Guarnerius?
The Guarnerius?
Yeah, and how did that happen?
That happened because I knew a man by the name of Drakes who owned the jewelry department at the Parker's store in Davenport.
Department store.
Where Aunt Carol used to work.
Oh yeah, your sister Carol Bickman used to work there.
Well, I don't remember that.
Yeah.
So he was a supporter of the symphony. I forgot. But anyways, I knew him. I visited him once in a while. So this one time that I visited him, he told me about, he knows a family in California, and they own a real fine violin. And I guess the father or the grandfather died, whoever the person it was. And he says, it's sure a fine instrument.
I wonder when that was.
So I asked him, well, how much would it cost? Would they send it out here?
Oh my God.
And how much would it cost? So he says, well, it wouldn't cost more than $5 or $6 one way. So I was thinking, well, maybe for $10 or $11, and he told me what a great violin it was. I figured it'd be worth it to me. If I didn't like it, he could send it back. So he says, well, yeah, that's all right. So about a week later, he calls me up. He says, say, Harry, you can come down and look at that violin. It just came in today. So I went over the same day.
Was you pretty well advanced at that time in your violin playing?
Did I advance?
Were you pretty well advanced?
Were you advanced as a violinist at that point?
Well, yeah.
Were you all grown up then?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Were you already in the liquor business then? When you bought the
I think
Guarnerius?
Must have been, or you wouldn't have any money.
Yeah, why would I have had the money?
That's
So
true.
I don't know.
Okay, so tell us more about
So you
the
went
Guarnerius.
down.
I have the papers in the safety deposit box. I'll look it up for you someday.
Okay, that's a good idea.
So you went down to see the violin.
Yes, I went down to see the violin. He took me in a little storage room at Parker's. You know where Parker's
Yeah.
store is? So I played about 6 notes on it, and I figured, boy, I got to buy this violin.
Did you know what it was?
Well, he told me what it was. It was a Guarnerius.
Uh-huh.
How much did he want for it?
I don't really remember right now.
I think he once said $1,500.
I think it was $1,500.
Sounds right.
No, I think it was $1,625, something like that.
Which was a lot of money at the time.
Yeah, sure is.
But the minute I played it, I knew, well, I wouldn't be satisfied with any other violin. And that's how I got it.
Well, how did you ever get involved with the symphony?
With the symphony?
Yeah.
Well, I had studied the violin, and I decided it'd be fun to play the symphony, so I had to play for somebody, and they gave me a seat in there.
And that was nice, in the first violin section. Well, that was very nice.
Do you remember when that was that you started with the symphony?
No, I didn't keep it.
Weren't you in high school?
Well, I was through with high school, I think.
And who was the conductor? Was it Oscar Anderson?
I think he came afterwards. They had the Ludwig Becker first.
Oh.
Yeah, it was Becker. I remember.
And afterwards, it was
Ice cream.
Anderson was there for quite a while.
I
Well, what do
remember
we got
you
here?
talked about Anderson almost
Oscar
reverently.
Anderson?
Yeah, you thought a lot of him.
He was quite a perfectionist.
Was he here when you came, Jean?
No.
We heard him. We had Anderson when we were around.
No,
Yeah,
but see,
well-
we had Piero Bellucci when I came.
I was afterward.
I think he was when I came. And then we had, what's the name of the one? Magnani? No, what was his name? He
Italian
died,
fellow?
remember?
Charles Gigante.
Charles Gigante.
Oh, Gigante.
Yeah.
He was a little guy, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Well, Harry, tell us about some of your experiences in the symphony. Remember, you told us a story about Mario Lanza, which is a little risque, but I think it's funny.
Remember it, Harry?
Risque.
Mm-hmm.
I had to stop and think about that one.
What happened?
We sat down, I don't remember if it was no, it wasn't a concert, I think it was a rehearsal. We sat down to play, and all of a sudden the concertmaster walked away from his seat and went over to the conductor and said something to him. Then he went back to his seat.
You mean to Mario Lanza?
Yeah, Mario Alonso. He went up and said something to them, and then he left the. This is just a rehearsal, and then he walked away from there, and he came back. And then we started rehearsing again. So during the intermission, I asked the concertmaster, "What did you whisper to the conductor?" And
To Mario Lanza.
Alonso, and he walked off of the stage, and then he came back. He said, I told him, Mr. Alonso, you're doing a real good job conducting. but
No,
you're
singing.
Singing.
Singing, oh, that's right, he's a singer. He says, but your fly is open. That's it, and he walked off, and they came back.
Didn't you ever hear that before? And what about the story of Grace Moore?
Oh, I really had some.
You had so many interesting experiences. Grace Moore.
Grace Moore was a soloist one time, and let's see,
She didn't like the way he was conducting.
No,
I
she
think, right?
came in at
She
the wrong
came in
note.
4 bars too
what
early.
happened? Yeah,
Bad,
she came
yes,
in 4 bars early. Then she's usually there's a little introduction.
Was this while they were practicing?
No, this was a
No, this was
concert. This was a
after.
concert.
And she, let's see how, the concertmaster all of a sudden got up and walked over to her. No, that's something else.
Wasn't it that she
Didn't you try to
came-
conduct for
she,
them?
Oh,
she
yeah.
got very disturbed.
She was singing, and she came in, you know how a singer sings a few bars and then rest and then he's come in again. Anyway, she came in 3 or 4 measures too soon. And she, right away, she realized that she did something wrong and everything was kind of mixed up. So she got real angry and she turned her back to the audience and she started directing while the regular director was still directing. You know?
She was directing and he was directing.
Yeah.
Oh, it was the...
Were you at that concert?
Yes, I was
Oh,
at the
you were at
concert.
the concert?
Yes,
So
I
what
was
am I
at the...
telling the story
No, well,
for?
they didn't hear
Did
it.
you hear her swearing?
Well, not from where we were sitting, but
She
they
got me to
probably
swear.
did it at the
Well, then
orchestra.
when she walked off stage, she had to go right past me, and she's talking evidently to herself. She says, "That damn dirty pig, that damn dirty pig." And did the paper ever write her up that time? You remember that?
Yeah, you got a tremendous write-up. was awful. It was a disgrace.
But if she only kept her head, it wouldn't have shown so much, so maybe didn't sound right for a couple of measures.
A lot of people recognized you from the symphony. Remember the guy who came into your store that day? One day?
Well, he said I should go hear the concert
You
sometime.
should go to the symphony sometime.
Oh yeah, this customer came in. He says, you ought to go to this symphony concert sometimes. He says that the guy playing in the violin section looks just like
Just like whom?
just like me. So I told him, well, it was me. So he says, no, I'm not kidding. That's even better.
That's good, Randy. Oh, that's funny. Just like the guys used to get Maury and you mixed up and would congratulate Maury on what a good concert he played.
I didn't know they
I would tell them thank you.
And so many of the kids who went to the
Why
symphony,
argue with him?
so many of the kids who went to the symphony would tell their mothers, oh, I saw Mr. Garber up there, or they get all excited. I know somebody in the symphony. I would hear that story.
Dad,
over
I
and over
remember
again.
when we would go to the concerts on Sunday afternoons in the Masonic Temple,
No.
you would look for us in the crowd, and when you found us, you would wave your bow at us.
That's
I
right.
forgot about that.
That's right. He used to do that to Chuck, too. Chuck went to the concerts on Sunday afternoon with us at a very early age. And that in those days, it was just Harry and Chuck and I would go on a Sunday afternoon. I guess Maury was home with Mel. I don't remember that. But we would be sitting there, and all of a sudden we'd see Harry's bow go up and down like that. And Chuck would stand up in the audience, and he'd be conducting the whole concert. I'd always manage to sit someplace where nobody else was, because he was conducting the whole concert.
Yeah, in those days our kids all went at 5 years old, didn't they?
Oh, we
About
went
five.
early, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We never missed one.
If I remember right, I think Chuck and Melvin got in a fight once.
That I don't remember, but
Oh,
it could
yeah.
I'm pretty sure they did.
They do?
be. They got in a
Didn't
fight.
happen between
That
siblings.
has happened a few times, off and on.
Mm-hmm. I think it happened with ours too.
Could be. Coming down from a symphony concert on a Sunday afternoon many years ago, as I walked down the steps, I was alone that day, and I was going down to meet Harry after the concert. And as I walked down those steps, the rumor or the word was going up the steps gradually about Pearl Harbor. That was December 7th, 1941. And I'll never forget, that's when I heard about Pearl Harbor.
That was on a concert day.
On
huh?
a concert day, and I was walking down the steps, and it was just as though somebody on the ground floor had heard, and the news kept going up, up, up. Oh, it was, I couldn't believe it, but of course that's where I got the news.
That was when, around 1942?
41,
Yeah.
December 7th, 1941.
And then you were in the service, Harry.
Yeah, you were in the Army too, Harry.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, why don't you
When
tell
was
us
that?
about that?
Do you remember when you went in?
Not the exact date, no.
Approximately 42, in 1942 sometime.
Somewhere
That's when it
in
was. Yes, it was 42, I know.
Remember we all drove you to the CB&Q depot? And you left from there?
Yeah, but do you remember what happened before the train took off?
What happened?
We were at the depot. This was the old Burlington Lines depot, which no longer exists downtown Rock Island,
On 20th Street.
on 20th Street. Harry, Maury, Chuck, who was little Charlie at the time, and I. Chuck was he was just about a year old at the time. That's how I know when he
Wow.
left. And first of all, Chuck took his first steps at that Burlington Lines depot walking to Uncle Harry. That was when he walked for the first time. I remember that. Then, we were very early. We were waiting for the train, and all of a sudden Harry said, I left my watch at home. I don't have my watch.
Oh, I saw that?
Yep. So we all looked at our watches. There was still plenty of time, and we weren't too far, So Maury got in the car and went home. The rest of us waited at the station, and he went home and got Harry's watch.
I could have bought a GI watch for $1 or so.
I don't know what it was. I know what kind of a watch, but you had forgotten your watch.
You didn't know about PXs then.
Well, he wanted his watch, and so he got it.
And so you went to Norfolk, Virginia right from there?
Yeah.
And how long did you...
Did he go up to Wisconsin somewhere from there?
No, he was in Norfolk, Virginia.
And did you go to Wisconsin, Mary?
I don't remember about Wisconsin.
I thought he went somewhere else before
You
he
mean
went
like
to
Camp
Norfolk.
McCoy or something at Madison to get started? No. So anyway, then you because of your, of course we skipped a big hunk of time here. You were a bookkeeper, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so they sent you to Norfolk, and you spent the war there in Norfolk.
He knew how to type. He took typing in high school.
Oh, you knew how to type.
Typing, I think, is what...
That's how he got into the
I didn't
branch
know
of the
that.
service. Sure.
So that's where I inherited my...
The typing ability?
Mr. Garber, you remember that story about when your dad went to fix the clock at the Arsenal?
The clock tower?
I know he did, but I don't know just what he did there.
Well, maybe
Maybe
Maury.
Maury can
Maybe
tell
Maury
us
can
the
tell
story.
you.
Can you tell?
Well, the maintenance department there knew that my father could fix a clock. So they sent him and another guy up to the top of the clock tower to repair the clock.
When was this approximately?
He must have had somebody else
Around
besides who really
19,
knew how to handle that.
1916, 17, or 18. Probably
Somewhere around there.
1917. So he and his buddy took a couple bottles of beer. It was a hot day, and they went up to the top of the clock tower.
I didn't know that.
So they fixed the clock.
Did it run backwards?
Then they drank the beer, and they fell asleep up there. But luckily, they woke up at 4:30
In time to go home.
in time to go home.
They didn't get fired over it.
Did they ever fix the clock?
It's still running even today.
See?
That's the oldest
that's
building at
proof.
the Arsenal, isn't it? The
But my
clock tower?
earliest recollection, I must have been around 5 or 6 years old. I would walk down 24th Street to meet him at 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and he'd come walking off the Arsenal Bridge, and I would meet him, and I remember hundreds of people walking off the bridge from the Arsenal. But I remember that event.
So your dad worked, what did he do at the Arsenal exactly?
He was a harness maker. Those were the days of the cavalry.
When he worked for the government, he did all kinds of jobs.
Did he learn how to do that in Russia?
I doubt it.
Do you know
did
what
he
the
do
word
there?
garber means?
Isn't it a tailor? or
It's a
something?
leather worker.
Really? I
In
didn't know that.
German,
In German.
it means a leather tanner in German.
Leather tanner, excuse me.
Now, how in Russia he got a German name? This
That's
must
very common.
Must have to do with migrations that went on
Back
from
and
one
forth.
country to another.
My mother said that the Germans were very influential in Russia. They had high positions, and they had administrative jobs and so
You
on.
mean the German Jews?
No, the
Germans in
Germans.
general.
The Germans.
The Germans. Germany was respected. And wasn't Tsar Nicholas II's wife German?
But did your
I
father
think so.
do that kind of work? He didn't do that kind of work in Russia, did he? Leather work?
I don't know what he
You
did
don't
in
know what he
Russia.
did.
When did he come here to the United States?
Well, at the turn of the century, it must have been around 1908, 10. Carol was born
In Russia.
in Russia.
Oh, she
Mary was
was.
born here.
How did your dad happen to come to Rock Island?
Now that is a very good question.
And a
It's
good
an excellent
story.
question. When he got off of the boat in New York,
They didn't want them all living in New York.
No, that wasn't his reason.
when he got off of the boat in New York, he saw what life was like in New York. And he would say, in Jewish, he would say, "Es reichem zach zu viel."
In other-
That meant people are rushing too much here.
It's just too much
Too much
going
hustle
on.
and bustle and noise and everything. He couldn't stand it.
So
He
somebody
was used to a
told him
little town.
in Chicago it's a slower pace. So he went to Chicago.
But how did he get to Chicago? That's what I have always wondered.
Well,
By train?
It wasn't, I don't know. I don't know.
I mean, he
Probably by
had
train.
your mother and he had
Well,
Carol.
let me finish one thought
Yeah, I
at a
know.
time. So when he got to Chicago, he said it's still too fast a pace to suit him. He didn't like it. But somebody told him that in a little town not far called Rock Island, he had some friend here from Russia.
They called them Landsmen. That
Yeah.
meant that they came from the same town. A
In
land
Russia.
man. Yeah, from the same little town in Russia. Actually, where they lived in Russia, it wasn't Russia then. It was Lithuania. That's why that whole family
No.
were
Well,
called
when he-
Litvaks. Because they were called Litvaks because they came from Lithuania, as my family did too. But now that whole area is part of the Soviet Union. It was taken over Latvia, Lithuania,
Estonia.
and Estonia. Those three.
So when he came here, he said the pace here is just fine. This is just what he likes. So he remained here and raised a family.
Where did you meet your mother?
Well, they were
Not in
married in
Russia.
the old
They were
country.
married.
Oh, they were married there?
Sure, Carol was born there.
Carol was born.
That's right.
Carol was born in Russia.
Theirs was probably an arranged marriage.
Who knows the details?
I don't know.
Well, they were all arranged then, weren't they?
Most of them were arranged.
Do you have any relatives now in
I
Russia?
knew he was going to ask that.
Well, if we do, we don't know where they are.
You don't know what their names are now?
If they are alive.
Well, if any of these families had relatives there, they probably, if they remained in any of those parts, let's say the time of the Second World War, they were probably gone then. And it's very unlikely. Let's put it
There were
that
a
way.
lot of Russian Jews in those days. You wouldn't have noticed it. They have a finger missing. You know why?
I've never seen any of them,
I
I've
haven't
heard
either.
about it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. They created a disability so they would not have to serve in the Tsar's army. They would cut off a finger.
And a lot of them just
A lot of them.
emigrated.
Yeah, but if they couldn't get out, if they couldn't get out fast enough or whatever,
They'd cut off a finger.
sure, immigration was the more desirable thing to them.
In the meantime, thousands of them got out.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, well, they really had harrowing trips too when they got
And
out.
they
It
had
wasn't
harrowing
just,
experiences
You don't just
in the
get a
Tsar's
passport
army.
and get on a train and go.
And I'll tell you something
They
else.
crossed
A
on
lot of
foot.
them, when they went on a boat, they wanted to maintain kosher food. And a lot of them, the poor ones, would travel in the what was called the steerage section of the boat. That's
You know,
the bottomless
Rear.
The bottom,
immigrants
the
from all
bottom.
countries
in
do
the
that.
bottom. And they would take with them bread and all kinds of provisions in order to be able to maintain kosher food.
Well, when they immigrated, their main possessions that they usually took, from what I understand, they took their feather beds. In other words, that was like their down quilts, their feather quilts that they carried with them. They took their Shabbos candlesticks that I still had, only now Naomi has the candlesticks that were my grandmother's when she came. Those were their most precious possession. And of course their prayer books with talit and that type of thing. But I mean, the household possessions, the feather quilt,
And feather pillows.
and feather pillow, and the candlesticks, and then whatever pots and pans they could manage to take. They thought they couldn't get anything here.
Do we still have any of those prayer books left, or did we get rid of them?
Naomi has them. You mean those little ones, that set that was your father's? There were a set of prayer books. If you ever get,
How they ever carried that stuff on the
yeah,
boat? I
this
don't
was
know.
interesting. They were a set. Each book is about, say, six inches high, something like that. Little tiny things, and
We don't have any of
they
them.
belonged to your grandfather, Debbie. And each volume, it seemed, was of a different date. They were all printed in Russia. 1890, 1892, I mean, way back. But by the time I was on the scene, by the time we were around, They were literally falling apart. The pages were falling out.
They were dried out.
They were dried out. They were yellowy. They were really crumbling. And we didn't know
what they lived by.
Yeah,
people.
but wait a minute. We didn't know what to do with them. And I knew if we kept them any length of time, they would simply disintegrate completely. At that time, Naomi and Herschel were in Cincinnati at HUC, Hebrew Union College. And Naomi was working in the library there. She took that set of books, and she knew where they got their binding down there. They had them rebound. So the books, the binding, they are rebound in a similar style so that they look old. The inside, the contents are the same. They're the original, but the binding is different. And they have them sitting on the shelf if anybody wants to see them or have them or anything. But it's really a
I think they were
relic.
yellow with age.
They were. Even before we were married, they were yellow with age.
Paper really crumbles
Yeah,
when it's
so you
yellow.
can imagine.
Warren, do you know anything about your father's father?
My father's father.
Your grandfather?
Your mother's father?
His
Parents?
father's name, your father's father's name was Moshe. That's whom he is named after. Harry and their mother's father's name was Hirsch
Tzvi.
or Tzvi, which is the same thing. One is Yiddish and one is Hebrew, and that's the one that Harry is named after. That's all I know about them. I mean, I know their names, and that's about it.
He was a Hebrew teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Your grandfather?
Your grandfather?
Yes, their mother's father. I called him a rabbi, but I think he was more of a teacher, from what I understand.
That was one of the highest professions in those days, to be a rabbi and a teacher.
Mm-hmm. Harry, you didn't tell us anything about how you happened to get into the liquor business. You remember?
So I don't remember how.
Maury, do you remember how it was after Prohibition?
All right, when did Prohibition end?
Prohibition ended in 1932 when Roosevelt took office.
That was one of the first things he did.
That was one of the planks in his platform.
Of course, I think kids wouldn't know what Prohibition means. I mean,
Well,
unless
we know.
you know?
All
Okay.
right, that's enough.
That's something that's in
So,
history books.
Uh-huh. That's history.
So liquor came back, and there was a tremendous pent-up demand for liquor. There was a guy in
Good
Rock
liquor.
Island by the name of Ben Harris who knew the nature of people, how they love to drink. So he
And he knew how to make
he
money.
was very wise. He anticipated everything. So he opened a wholesale liquor place.
Well, he was in
And
the
he
tobacco
had,
business.
and he had a sister who had a grocery store on Fifth Avenue, a half a block away from where we lived. And he talked her into putting in a shelf in her grocery store
Oh, Mrs. Gensler.
with liquor.
Oh, that was Mrs. Gandler, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So they put in a shelf of liquor, and it began to sell right away. So then they devoted 2 shelves to liquor. The next thing you know, they pushed out all the groceries, and it became a liquor store. Well, my sister Mary, it so happens, was working for Ben Harris, and she saw what was going on in the volume of business that was being done, and she would come home and relate it to all of us, what goes on in the liquor business. So I, or we, or some of us decided that this was a good street, and we would open a liquor store where my father had a shoe repair business. So we put in a partition in the store and moved his machinery in back of the partition.
How'd your
because-
father feel about this?
Well, it wasn't a big money maker.
Well, he
for him
thought
anyway.
that it would be a
But,
good,
but yeah,
a good business.
we couldn't cut off his livelihood, you know. So the whole store was only maybe from that wall to this wall.
Oh,
Oh, it was
no.
bigger than that, where it was narrow, but it was
Well,
longer.
Anyway, we set up some shelving, and Ben Harris put in a stock for us.
There was a story attached
on
to that.
consignment.
On
On
consignment.
consignment. You see, you can say what you want about him from other respects, but the
gave him credit.
Garbers had a good name, and he trusted us. Otherwise, he wouldn't trust his own mother. You know. But he trusted us.
Everything's COD with it.
So, and I made a homemade sign that I hung up across the sidewalk, made out of presswood, you know.
What did it say?
And,
What did it say on the
it
sign?
said,
Cut rate liquor.
Garber's Liquor. At that time, nobody was cut
Nobody
rating
knew cut
liquor.
rate. They all
There
came in
There wasn't
together.
enough liquor. Everybody made a full markup on it. There was no need to cut rate, you know. So the business prospered. And Harry had this job for about $7 a week in this fruit wholesale. So I told him.
What was he doing there?
Yeah, what were you doing,
What
Harry?
was he doing
Wait,
there?
maybe,
He was a
Harry, do you remember what you were
bookkeeper.
doing?
Well, I had charge of the office.
He had charge of-
What company was it?
It was called Interstate Fruit Company. I think that's what the name was.
Yeah, who owned it?
Well, Sam Moskowitz, I think, was a part
That's
owner.
Yeah.
in Georgetown.
And I don't remember who else.
Georgetown.
George Steck.
Oh, George Steck and Abe Meyer.
That's it. Abe Meyer, yeah. Okay.
And these guys, he used to tell us, were artists at bouncing checks.
Okay, Maury, go on
Remember
with your
that?
story.
Huh?
What about the bouncing checks?
They never had enough money to cover.
Oh, you mean that,
I was always overdrawn.
in the interstate?
Every
Oh,
day
yeah.
I'd have to,
In the fruit company.
Okay, yeah.
I was overdrawn $300, overdrawn $500. So every day my job was to look and see which check should be in by that particular day. So I'd say, today I need $500. The next day I'd say I need $300. And the day after I need $600. So that's where they operated.
So anyway, he got paid a meager sum for it. And,
Well, it was the going
and
rate.
I was fresh from college then and had great ideas about being an engineer and needed some experience. And there were no jobs around. So I told Harry he ought to quit his job and take...
Well, who ran the store in the meantime
Well,
during
I
the
was
day?
running a good deal of it. And I told him as soon as the job...
Well,
opened
wait a
up-
minute. In those days, wasn't Mary still working for Ben Harris?
Yeah.
And Faye was working on the Arsenal,
Yeah,
or where?
well,
No, she was working
well,
for the
Rock
plow.
Island Bridge and Iron.
Bridge and Iron Works. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And Carol, she was working
Carol
at
was
Parker's.
Parker's, yeah.
And so you were the only one who
Well,
was not working, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, how
So
did
you
you
ran
get
the
by
store
not working?
because he just graduated from college,
Oh,
from university.
I had a degree and no place to go with it.
So that's why he ran the store during the day.
So I told you, as soon as I get a job, I want
So
to
how
find
long
the
did it
liquor
take for you to
store
get a job? Do you
Huh?
remember? How long did it take for you to get
I don't know,
an
sometime.
outside job?
Yeah, but he wanted you to
that
quit
year.
your job before he got a job. Otherwise, he was just going to walk out of the store, see?
Well, I wouldn't have done that. So then sometime later on, I got a job at Rock Island Plow Company.
And this company that I worked for, so they never had enough money. So once in a while, if the checks came in, I had a little balance. I forgot how to figure it because it was a plus instead of a minus.
You were so used to working with
I was
minuses.
so overdrawn $600, overdrawn $1,000. And if we're down to, I'd tell the bosses, hey, we're only $150 overdrawn.
So the business prospered, and we needed more
We were
room.
able to pay the bill.
We needed more room, and we moved my father's machinery out of the back room into a little, there was a couple rooms in back of our house. So we moved his machinery in there.
Maury, you didn't say that the house was right next door to this store.
Oh, yeah,
Oh, the
that's
house-
They
right.
lived right
the house
next
was
door
next
to
door
the store.
2519 Fifth Avenue, Rock Island.
Was
right?
the house, was
That
the address of the house. But what did you do, supposing somebody was in the store and they needed more help? What did they do?
We
Well-
were never that busy.
Yes,
Except
you
on
were.
the holidays.
With
Yes,
my ingenuity, I ran some wires from the store under the ground into the house and attached a buzzer to it under the counter. And one buzzer was for help, and two buzzers meant something else, and three buzzers meant call the police.
Yeah, that, in case they had a holdup.
You know. So, the business prospered, and then years rolled by, and then then the Liberty came along. There was a liquor store right off the bridge called Spectre Liquor Store.
It's still
there.
It was doing a terrific business. So I don't know who decided, Harry or me or both of us, that, to establish a liquor store a little bit ahead of this other liquor store.
No, I'll tell you that story.
Okay.
I went by there one day, and Walter Spector was standing out in front, and we got to talking, and he said he was bragging about how much business he's doing, and he took me through, and I said, wow, his warehouse was full of liquor, every place you look. So I decided there's room here for another liquor store. So then I talked to Sal Meyer, remember him?
He owned that property.
He owned the building. I guess he wanted to sell it. So I finally got together with him, and I bought that. And
that must have been around 1936.
well, no, 35, I think.
No, it was later than that, Harry.
Well, anyways, that's about where it
I know I
was.
was on this.
So this, Ben Harris gave me merchandise.
Excuse me, I got to bring
For there,
something
too?
upstairs.
Wait, Maury,
And
wait,
I
don't
want
go
to show it
yet.
to
Not
you.
now. Wait.
So Ben gave me all the liquor, a good assortment, but there was a lot of brands that he didn't have, and people were asking for other brands. So I started chiseling on him and put in other brands, but I kept him under the counter because I knew if he'd come in, he'd raise hell about it, because I haven't got his liquor, all of his liquor.
Was that at the Fifth Avenue store, or was
Fifth
that?
Avenue.
That was still at the
That was
Fifth
Fifth
Avenue
Avenue.
store. Yeah. that's
So you
what
were
I thought.
buying liquor from someone else?
By that time,
Yeah.
after he was in the Fifth Avenue store for a while.
And there's no reason why he shouldn't, really.
So then he happened to walk in the store and saw somebody else's liquor, and he started raising hell about it. Here, I put you in business and everything, and you got somebody else's liquor. I says, well, people are walking out, they wanted other brands. So anyways, he,
But he was also overcharging you, wasn't he?
well, he was charging
Yeah,
plenty.
yeah.
Then I found out it's practically what others were selling it for. So
Nice guy.
I told him, well, I'll tell you what you do. You figure out how much I owe you, and I'll pay you off. Oh, pay me off? Well, I don't mean that. But I think I'm entitled to the business. I said, you're entitled to the business on brands that you carry, but not other brands that people walk out and that's what they want. So from then on, it didn't bother me. But I bought liquor wherever I needed from whichever company had it. So it didn't give me any trouble anymore.
Did that cut down on the amount of liquor you bought from them if they were buying the other brands instead?
Well, those that he handled, I felt I should buy from him. But
Harry, do you remember that brand called Golden Dew or Golden Dawn?
all
Golden
kinds of
Dog? Golden Dog?
Well,
There was one called Crab Orchard, dude. That was a good song.
And there was one called Old Pocono,
Was that a beer? or a
named after
whiskey?
the Pocono Mountains.
That's where they used to make liquor.
You know where the Pocono Mountains
Yeah,
are, don't
yeah.
you?
yeah, you know. But when the Liberty liquor store was opened up, that must have been something around 1937.
No, I think no,
36 or
35,
37. No, you just opened the Fifth Avenue about 34,
34.
35.
Oh, I think it was 35.
What, Fifth Avenue?
Yeah.
Then when was the Liberty?
The Liberty was
Years
afterwards.
A few years later, yeah.
About 2 years later, I think.
Well, I'll tell you a story about the Liberty, too. I don't know too much about the liquor business.
No,
But
don't tell them that.
I'm going to tell them
Yeah.
that story.
No,
tell us.
I'm
Yes.
going to tell
Yes,
them that
it's for
story.
posterity.
What happened?
Absolutely.
Let's
Yeah.
hear it.
I think you better let our kids hear that too. When I came on the scene, the reason I know the Liberty was around 38 or something like that because I came to this area in 1938. And I met Maury soon after that. And we were going out, and one evening we were supposed to go out. I don't remember where we were supposed to go, but we had a date to go out. But before we would go, he had to stop at the Liberty liquor store for something. He wanted to see something there. Okay, so we stopped at the Liberty liquor store. And guess what? Harry was in the process of putting in a walk-in cooler. Wasn't it a big walk-in cooler? So guess what? Maury got started. He couldn't see anything just, sitting there that somebody else would do. He got started. He said, there are pinball machines there. Would you like to play the pinball machine? And he started, and our whole evening was spent in the Liberty Liquor Store. And I was so furious. The whole
Did you
thing
appreciate
almost,
the finer things in life?
the whole thing almost went up in smoke right there. I just stood there the whole evening. I didn't know what to
Didn't you think it
do.
was fun?
Not really. And I can laugh at it now.
Did I
but
say I was
angry.
sorry?
You must have some other compensating
I guess it must
assets.
have had. That was the Liberty Liquor Store.
Yeah, well,
It was a very busy place and a very thriving place, and boy, people were coming
Harry,
and
tell us
going all
about
the
the guy
time.
that came in. I love to hear that story. That offered to give you the guy's shoes.
oh, yeah.
Oh, the guy says, you know me, I always treat you. I'd hear that all the time. So I know right away they want credit. So he says, I got a good pair of shoes here, and I'll leave them here so that there'll be security. Then when I get paid next week or whatever, then he says, I'll take them back. So I see he's not carrying any shoes. I said, well, where's the shoes? He said, I'm wearing them. But it was winter time. So I said, what are you going to do? He says, it's not cold for me.
Harry, tell me about the time one of your clerks cashed a stub of a check from J.I. Case Company.
Oh, I forgot about that. Those dummies, they made the stuff,
That was his
stuff of the check, they made it look just like a check.
they
It's
had
the
these
J.I. Case
long
Company.
half checks,
So the dumb clerk says it's really a copy of the original check. Anyways, this dumb clerk cashed a check for about $50 or so. That was a lot of
A lot
money.
of money
then.
then, yeah.
So go look for him, So you just learn that way.
Tell me about the time you made a bank deposit at night and you saw a big bag stuck in
Oh,
it.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
it was a good
This
story.
night depository, it's like a cylinder. You put your deposit in, and you close it, and that turns it, and it drops down. So I open it up, and somebody made a deposit. The bag was about this long, and it was bigger than what it had room for, but they shoved it in. I had a hard time pulling it out. Then I was thinking to myself, what do I have to pull it out for? It's not my affair, and lug it home and bring it back the next day. But anyway, I pulled it out, and I took it home.
No, you didn't take it home. You got it back in.
Oh, yeah.
But you
I-
took note of the number.
I turned it over a couple times so that it finally dropped.
But you saw what the number was, what the
Yeah, I
number
knew
was.
that. So the next day I go in the bank and I ask him,
Whose
who's got
numbers?
bag 528 or whatever it is? So he says, why? So I told him that whoever put it in there didn't check to see if it dropped down. So he told me, I think it was the Eagles, wasn't it?
But Tenenbaum.
Tenenbaums.
Tenenbaum.
Oh,
Tenenbaums. That was the
Tenenbaum.
forerunner of the
And then you
Eagles.
asked
I
how
mean,
much
they
money
merged
was
with
in
them.
it.
I think it was about $9,000 or $10,000.
No, it wasn't. It was 13,000.
13. How do you remember the figure?
Because you told me.
You told us
Well, it was
13,000.
13.
$13,000.
See, they cashed a lot of checks. A good part of it was checks, but there was a lot of money in there too.
That was a
cash.
supermarket, Tenenbaums.
So it was their daily receipts.
Yeah, isn't that something? Well, Harry, you want to tell about how we met?
Maybe left something out.
How we met? How we
How
met?
did you ever meet Jean? She's not from around here. How'd you ever find her?
See, where do I go? Swimming with it?
You fished me up, you always say. You got me fishing. Let's see.
Who were
We
you
were out
with?
fishing and you
Who
caught
were
me.
you with in a resort? You remember when you went out to a resort?
You went down,
I
out
know
to
it was a
Oakton Manor in
Yeah.
Pewaukee, Wisconsin,
Yeah.
with Sam Solomon.
Oh, that's what it was,
And you were fishing, you were sitting in a boat off of one pier, and Sam was sitting on the other pier. And my mother and dad and my aunt and I went for a ride for a half hour from our house in Milwaukee. We went to Oakton Manor to see if a friend of mine was having lunch there, which she wasn't. She was gone already. But anyway, so then my dad and I walked down to the lake, and here was Sam Solomon sitting on the pier, And my dad, being very gregarious, started a conversation with him.
So
and I
that's
got
where you got it.
That must be where you get your...
Yeah, that's where I got it. That's where I got it. And so...
You can start a conversation with anybody, anywhere, in any
That's
country,
right.
whether you
That's
speak the
right.
language or not.
Oh, I learned the language real
continue,
fast
too.
if it's necessary.
My father was the same way.
So anyway, Sam, after a long time, and I'm just standing there idly waiting for this conversation to be over, and anyway, Sam says something about he's there with a friend, and he's over on the next pier. Come
That's
on,
the smartest thing he
I'll
ever did.
introduce you. Of course, Sam, in the back of his mind, saw a single girl and thought it's about time that Harry did something about it. So anyway, we walked to the other pool, and we were introduced to Harry, and we visited for a while. Then Sam and Harry and my dad and I went back to see the women who were sitting on a bench near the car. And Sam and Harry invited me to stay for dinner. And they would drive in Oakton Manor, and you should be... Those resorts in those days, I mean, you really dressed up, and here I was looking like a schlepper, you know.
Well, there's nothing slow about them, was it?
No. So anyway, first of all, one reason for going back to the car was that it was important to get the approval of the women,
Of
and
your
my
mother,
father
you mean,
also
of your mother.
of my mother and my aunt.
You want to look them over for...
Which aunt?
My auntie Dina, Esther, my auntie Dina Ulovich, Esther Zipser's mother.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So, and in the meantime, it gave my dad the opportunity to interview them a little further.
Sam was a married man.
Well, so he was safe. The
Sam was
question
married
is,
Oh, sure.
it was determined that Harry is a substantial businessman.
Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe Sam wasn't
Yes, he
married.
was
Sam,
married then.
He was married.
Sure he
Gina
was.
says yes.
But
He wasn't married very long.
Harry was a businessman who had his feet on the ground. He also played in a symphony,
Oh,
so he
boy.
was no fly-by-night. And therefore, it was safe for me to
That
stay
should have
there.
scared him away.
For
Playing.
me to stay there for dinner and have them drive me home.
Who would do that today, to leave a daughter with two strangers
They
and
drove
have
you
dinner
home.
Right.
and have dinner with them? And
No, the parents wouldn't even know today.
no, but I mean for them to deliberately say, "Stay, you may stay for dinner," and then these guys would drive you home. People you don't even know. You just
Oh, by that
Yeah.
time, my father had them all sized up.
What about your mother?
And my mother, too, I guess. Anyway, don't you think Harry could make the kind of an impression that would give parents confidence in him?
Mr. Garber, what were you doing up there in this resort? Why did you go up there?
Just to relax, that's all.
I thought to look over the women.
Yeah, I thought your sister
You don't
Carol sent you there to look over the women.
She did?
Well, remember last year for your 35th anniversary party, she wrote a poem. No, Faye. Was
Oh.
it Faye that wrote
No,
the poem?
Carol
It was
wrote.
Carol. Carol wrote a poem to the effect that she had urged you to go to this resort because it was about time you fished out a woman.
She might have said that.
Well,
I don't
apparently
recall
nothing
it.
happened. Apparently his stay at the resort wasn't that productive. This was purely coincidental that we were there.
So how did you get together again for a second date?
Oh, then he sent a postcard to me from Hibbing, Minnesota. Where was it? Colonel Faulkner's resort in
I
northern
remember those
Minnesota.
details.
Very nice resort. And then he said he's coming to Chicago. And I don't know when it would be. And he wanted to know, would I be interested in going to Ravinia to hear Heifetz, Artur Rubinstein, and Dmitri Pietrogorsky.
Do you remember what they played?
Huh?
You got such a good memory. What did they play?
I don't know, but and then it was a series of interesting evenings. Like he took me to the Camellia House at the Drake. After all, none of my friends could afford that, and it was so nice to go to this fancy place I heard about.
Do you remember?
No, but we sat next to Mayor Kennelly.
She remembered every detail.
Yeah,
Kennelly.
and we were sitting on tables for two with, that were along the bench, and.
How long did you know each other when you got engaged?
Let's see, that was about July 4th, wasn't it? See, I was living in Chicago.
What time?
I just came to Milwaukee to visit my folks. I think it was July, and we got engaged in November, and we got married in December.
What year was this?
I told you if we
1949.
get married in December, we were going to get married the following year. But we decided it'll cut my income tax.
And
So
believe me, for
I
him
told
to
that
get
to
away,
Gene, I says, you know, we can have a sizable cut in the income tax.
This
So,
is a substantial
and
decision.
now
thought it
they're
over, and we
independent.
decided, we got married, what was it, the 30th of
The
December?
14th.
14th of December. Oh, that was a whirlwind of romance. And my poor parents, they were trying to arrange for a wedding. Oh, did they have a rough time. Everything was taken for Christmas parties.
So you got married in the Palmer house, right?
No, we got married in Hotel Sherman. No,
Sherman
is it still
Hotel,
in
was it?
existence? I don't think
I
so.
don't think somebody bought 'em out.
Randolph and Clark, between Clark and
By the
Gilman.
Greyhound station.
Yeah. Is it still there?
Isn't the Greyhound station at Randolph and Clark?
Oh, maybe that's where yeah, it is.
Well, anyway.
Maybe it was LaSalle, between Clark and LaSalle, I don't remember. But anyway, it was a nice hotel, and we had 50 people at the wedding, and everybody came in from Rock Island, and some people decided they wanted to crash the wedding, and my parents had it all figured out how many people, and they eliminated a lot
More
of
people
friends.
came in.
Well, my father was ill then, he couldn't go.
Your father wasn't living then,
Oh, what year was this?
1949.
Oh, yeah, he died in 1940.
Yeah.
Was it in 40 that he died?
So, I was still working though. Well, my story will come later. Right now, let's talk about Harry.
What else do I know?
Well,
Everything,
I think one of the interesting things is that you were very dedicated to the symphony. And all through the years, it was very hectic for you. Excuse me.
Or is
Bless
it?
you. Robert Hughes.
Excuse
Robert
me.
Hughes.
Thank you. It was very difficult for you to work, to have a business that was open 7 days and 7 evenings, and still go to symphony rehearsals and practice and
Just-
have twin babies, Debbie and Alan,
It gives
as
the
well
help
as
a
David,
chance
who was
to
3 years older.
increase their income.
Excuse me. Thank you. And so, consequently, you weren't home very much. And you weren't home very much, and you really got to rehearsals. It was amazing what kind of schedule you were on in order to get to symphony rehearsals. But you continued to play in the symphony, and it was...
But didn't you enjoy my practicing scales and
Oh, of
stuff like that?
course.
I remember that. I remember going to sleep every night and hearing your scales coming up, the sound of your scales coming up through the basement.
But they weren't all scales.
No.
It's just that the violin part alone might sound like scales.
No, it wasn't all scales.
And it really was. He was very good at it. And of course, he had this beautiful violin. Pietro,
Cornelius.
which Cornelius? Not Pietro.
Joseph.
Joseph Cornelius, right?
Mhm.
Joseph Cornelius. Yeah, it's
No, it's
Joseph.
not
It's
Joseph.
Pietro.
Yeah, Petrus Cornelius.
Petrus Cornelius. Okay. So, of course, it was a very fine violin to be protected all these years, and also heavily insured. And
You know that right now it's not insured?
honey, it's insured. Don't worry about that. But
Oh, you included it on the other policy?
Everyone who calls.
so.
It's all right to talk
I'm not
about other
talking secrets.
things.
I just,
She had a telephone
I had a
call, so
telephone call in between. I didn't want to interrupt here. But Naomi says hello
We
to
could avoid it.
everybody. She didn't realize we had company, and when I told her what we were doing, she got so excited, and she said, "Is there any way I could get hold of that tape? Because she has a machine where a friend does, where she can make a copy of the tape, and she'd love to have a
yeah,
copy
I don't
of it."
know if we're saying enough important stuff
Oh,
about
that's
music.
I
important.
think
That's
this is
all
great.
exactly what the
Yeah.
kids want.
Well, then we must continue with the symphony because all these
Where were
years
you? I'm sorry. I didn't
Harry
mean to
played
interrupt.
in the symphony, and then he sold the Liberty on September 1st, 1978, Well, he closed the Fifth Avenue store long before that and sold the building.
In the 60s, right?
It probably
Yeah,
was in the
early
60s.
somewhere around there.
And that was because at that time the city made the street into a one-way street, and that took away a lot of traffic.
That killed the traffic.
Killed the traffic pattern, and so he decided
on
to have
that corner.
just one. Yes, they did some remodeling of the access and so on, which made a difference. So he decided to have just one store. And then September 1st, 1978, it was time to retire,
What time
and he
of the
sold
day
the
was it?
store to a guy by the just the business, but not the building, to a fellow by the name of Danny Burgess, who had worked for him and
What
had
was
worked
his
in
name?
plenty.
You stole
Daniel
enough money.
Burgess.
Danny Burgess.
Danny Burgess, who turned out to be a much worse crook than we ever anticipated.
Dad said he stole enough money so that he could buy him out.
Yeah, that's
While he was
right.
working
That's
for
right.
That's what he suspected.
He had a small business administration loan that Harry had talked the bank into. He didn't have to do much talking, but Harry's word was as good as gold with the bank. And when he recommended Danny, who had been working for him, the bank was willing to give him the loan. Got $90,000 loan.
I wonder if you ever paid him back.
Of course
paid him
not.
back. And after, I don't know, a couple of years, he absconded with the merchandise and the cash register and everything else, and left everybody flat, including the bank. And
He was an attorney.
no,
No,
you're
that
talking
was
this
the next.
guy.
That was the next
That was the next guy.
My culture.
So anyway, Danny Burgess has not been heard from since, and he owed
probably in jail.
He owed one of the companies $30,000, and that
Isn't
one
he
of
wanted by
the
the FBI?
He's an
I
attorney.
don't think
Yeah,
so.
one
No,
night,
he's not
one night he
an attorney.
backed up a big truck to the back door, and loaded up all the good whiskey, and took off with it.
And the cash register and everything.
He
And
didn't
off he
leave
went.
anything.
And put a sign up, closed for inventory. He told the clerks to go home, and that was the end of Danny Burgess.
And then, next
And
crook.
then after it had
Next
been
chapter, next crook.
empty for a while, came William R. Bailey, who was the son of Dr. and Mrs. Sidney Bailey,
And
who was
city
a,
councilman,
and was a city councilman and school board member,
school board member.
School board
And
member.
a lawyer.
and a lawyer.
In other words,
And
a pillar
Bill-
of the community.
Yeah, Bill decided to go into the liquor business, and
But he went to school at the same time Chuck did, and Chuck said even in high school nobody trusted him. He was
that's
just
funny
that
because I
kind
heard
of
other
a
people
guy.
say he was such a nice guy.
Got a smooth way
Well, anyway,
about him.
Bill
I'm
lived
sorry,
across
go
the
ahead.
street from us for a while. When he was married to Patty Potter, the daughter of newspaper publisher John Potter, deceased. And
He could have been sitting pretty now and be part of the Argus if he
well,
had done the right thing.
Patty inherited $3 million from her aunt Marguerite. So
She's comfortable.
anyway, they're divorced. But Patty was divorced once before, so there might have been something wrong
Yeah, but
when
what
they got
about
together.
Bill?
Well, anyways. yeah.
Anyway, Bill, we didn't know anything was wrong until we saw in the newspaper that Bill Bailey was indicted for having appropriated funds when he was a loan officer for the Farm Home Administration.
He didn't care
He
who he stole from.
appropriated the funds that were to go to two farmers, totaling $65,000, I think, and the money was supposed to have been used to buy the Liberty Liquor Store as well as Young's Tap. Young being Young's son, a Korean gal whom he met and lived with, and that thing dissolved too, so that she left him with, she left the business too later. But anyway, it was very involved and very shady, and Bill was so manipulative and so cute and so sweet and so baby-faced that nobody knew anything, that he was probably pulling things on us too. Until finally he knew he was to get a 10-year prison sentence. And a year ago, December 1983, is that right?
Yeah, it's almost 2 years now.
1983, he had all of a sudden he put a sign on his window, closed for remodeling, something like that. He Burgess, closed for inventory, closed for remodeling, at the time when the business is supposed to be the greatest, before Christmas and New Year's. And nobody could figure that one out either. And Bill remained in the store, living there too, we were told finally. And we don't know what
He
kind
had
of...
13 keys made for his friends.
Yeah, and he started storing furniture and stuff for other people in the store. And we were being nice to him. We didn't push him for money because he was broke. In the meantime, he wasn't getting out. In the meantime, the place was going to the dogs. And he was waiting to go to prison, but he was hoping to appeal. Well, anyway, the end result...
He was going to prison for non-payment of state tax.
He would... No, it was for embezzlement. He embezzled.
What difference will that make?
However, one of the interesting sidelines to this thing, there was so much there was so many legalities involved that we were involved in as a result of all this. Because of the dram shop law, we were to be responsible for his debts to the state government, which totaled about $17,000, I think.
Since you were the owner of the property.
Since we owned the property. And we had to defend ourselves when Bill was called to the state to show why he should not have his license revoked for non-payment of sales tax and I don't know what else.
His liquor license?
His liquor license revoked. Oh, he already had given up his law license.
He was disbarred.
He was disbarred before that. So anyway, we had to go down to Springfield to defend ourselves, which was only a matter of paper defense. But anyway, it meant getting down there bright and early in the morning in order
with
to...
him.
With him.
With the crook.
And listen, our lawyer, Robin Goodstein, she said, let's go have a cup of coffee or something, and so we took Bill along, too, for the coffee. And everything was nice and warm, and, you know, the way lawyers are when they have a case.
Gorgeous.
They're nice to the other side. Anyway, but Bill has a winning personality. Well, he finally did go to prison. And then when we got in there, we had a lot of trouble with the stuff stored in the store. It's still there. In the meantime, the building disintegrated. And we have been unable to sell it, although we've tried to for a year and a half. And we are now at the point where maybe we will get rid of the building, even if we have to almost give it away. So that's the story of Liberty, and the end, the demise of Liberty. Now, as far as the symphony is concerned, Harry retired from the symphony about the same time as he retired from the Liberty. And at that time, he did not send in a letter of resignation. But after a few months, Betty Stevens, who was the publicity chairman of the symphony board, called and she said, if Harry really retired, we'd like to honor him somehow. But let's keep it a secret. So she wanted information for the symphony program, and I gave her information, which was printed. And the night that it would be released, Harry was to go backstage during intermission, and then he'd be called out on the platform, on the stage, and the president of the board would make a presentation to him.
And was there an overwhelming applause? Was there?
There was a standing ovation.
Wow.
You weren't there, were you, Debbie?
It was beautiful.
It was just wonderfully done.
Of course we were there. Of course we were there.
He wasn't backstage when they called him. He was sitting in the audience.
Yeah,
No,
he didn't know, I thought.
No, I had to have him backstage.
He
I had to come
didn't know
backstage.
until that night, and then he had to go backstage.
Well,
during
I told
intermission.
Trudy about it, and I probably told you too about it in advance, and I know that Trudy said, well, don't just surprise him with that. You better warn him a little
That would
bit.
be a little too much of a shock.
It's too much of a shock. So when we came in, I showed him the symphony program, and then I told him he has to go backstage and that they were going to make a presentation.
But it was beautifully done.
It really was
Very
beautifully
lovely.
done, and
He
when
was
he
standing
came
up there in front of the symphony all by himself, and everybody with a standing ovation,
Oh,
just
it
like
was
for the
just-
world's greatest soloist, you know.
Really?
Well,
it
it's a
was
funny
just-
feeling. You wanted it's all
It's all that
applause
for me.
He was just, I mean, he was flabbergasted. And then I made room
Especially I didn't know
in the
anything
first
about
row.
it.
It was suggested that I make room, that I move to the first row and make room for him. So anyway, when he came down, he sat there after he came down from the stage. And then when the concert was over, you should have seen the people filing by, congregating around us and shaking his hand.
How many years did you
Why not?
say it was?
47 years.
That's right, and listen, anybody who's been with any organization, let alone a symphony, for all that time, they deserve that honor.
Well, they ought to pay me
Yeah.
some
Our present
extra checks.
Our present conductor is James Dixon, And he was a conductor at that time. He's a marvelous conductor. And William Hennigbaum has been in the symphony for many, many years, and he just now retired. And there are a couple of fundraising things for him as a foundation, you know. So anyway, and then of course now, since Harry's been retired, we're trying to make up for all the long hours by going on trips. We just returned from a wonderful trip to New England where we saw our son Alan. I didn't even mention the birth of the kids.
You can't do everything in one city.
In one tape.
In one tape.
No.
It's going to take a little longer, a little more than that.
But we should mention
That's
that
the history of the whole thing.
on October 4th, 1951,
Tell
our
how much
first
time
child
is left?
David was born.
You tell how much time is left?
And on May 7th, 1955, we had twins, Debbie and Alan. And we've been very fortunate to have wonderful children who've really been a joy to us and who have been who have applied themselves diligently to whatever they do.
Yeah, what do
And,
you do, Debbie?
and of
Stays out
course,
of trouble.
and David has given us 5 grandchildren, 5 adorable grandchildren, may have more, and is in the insurance business in Chicago, and has a wonderful wife, the former Deborah Brower. And Debbie Gale, our daughter, lives in San Francisco, and she is now an accomplished artist who is establishing a reputation for herself. And we're very happy she's visiting with us right now with her friend Ron Miska. And Alan, we just saw in Boston, where he is a resident at Brigham and Women's Hospital, and it will have a fellowship in I think, January in the Kennedy School of Government in the field of health economics, and will be an associate professor in the School of Medicine of Stanford University beginning next
Do
June.
you have to call him professor now?
Where is the Kennedy School?
It's at Harvard.
At Harvard.
Part
Will
of
he continue that? Will he be able to continue that when he's at Stanford?
Oh, no, this is a
That's just
6-month
a
fellowship.
6-month, okay,
Uh-huh.
okay.
During his 3rd year of residency.
Yeah,
So he will not be doing any medical work the last half of the
I see.
year. So,
So
is there
that's the
anything else
story
we
up
should-
to date, huh?
that's the story to date. I will say that we've had some wonderful musical experiences as a result of Harry's involvement. We've been in the Friends of Chamber Music, and we have also gone on a music festival at sea where we met some wonderful people
I don't know how interesting that is to posterity.
I wanted
and
to say...
entertained some of them, like Daniel Heifetz and Christina Walewska, who are soloists in Music Festival at Sea, and have also entertained the great tenor Richard Tucker and the world-famous violinist Yitzhak Perlman on 2 occasions.
On one of which our dog bit his hand.
Yes,
That's
fortunately
true.
not too
You know,
severely.
to go back a little bit, way, way back in Harry's earlier days, you know, when before the days of the Liberty and before a lot of the things you were just talking
It's
about.
really going back.
Yeah, really going back. After Harry and Maury's parents died, Maury and I were living in the old house on Fifth Avenue, that 2519 that they were talking about. And Harry was the only other Garber in town. Faye and Mary by then were in Chicago, and Carol was married living in Chicago. So, of course, Harry and Maury and I lived together and then we had one child and then another child, but in the old house. But he was part of our family, in other words, at that time. And so when we built this house in Hillcrest Court, of course, Harry moved with us. And so he lived here with us for a while. And he had the bedroom there that later became Naomi's room. That was Harry's room. And we forgot about it. It was until you met Jean and until things started happening on that front, Harry lived with us. And when Jean came to visit here, you stayed here too,
Yes,
remember?
I remember that.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know he lived here.
Oh, sure he did. We moved here in March of '49. And when were you married?
December.
In December. So it was just about but he lived with us previous to that in the old house.
We're going to be married in January, February. So we decided to be quite
That's interesting for
a
posterity.
savings. And I wouldn't have to pay Uncle Sam by
So they got married in December.
earlier.
Yeah, December 14th,
But you see, we were married in 1940, in June of 1940. And at that time when we were married, both of their parents were still living. But their father died in December of that year, in December of 1940. That was Charles Bazzalo Garber. That's the one after whom our older son is named. And their mother, Mindel Garber, died the following July. They died within 6 months of each other. And we moved into the house on Fifth Avenue after the father died. In other words, in December of 1940, that's when we moved in. Then, when the mother died, in July of 41, I think it was about that time that Faye was working for the Department of Immigration and Naturalization in Chicago. Mary was also in Chicago, and from that point on, in 1941, until Harry and Jean were married, Harry lived with us. First at the old house, and then for about 6-7 months, whatever it was, here.
You know, I think it's interesting. The kids always want to see the grandchildren want to see where did you live when you were little.
Mm-hmm.
And of course there was this big house that the family lived in on Fifth Avenue, 2519 Fifth Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
But later on, after the family moved out of there, it was moved.
At first, it was sold to a man who moved, and what did he do, Maury? His business was moving houses. And they wanted to move the house. They wanted to get it out of there, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was moved to 24th Street. And
near Fifth Avenue, right?
And Chuck and Harry were walking after the house.
Walking or driving? Oh, they were walking. I told
and Chuck kept yelling, "That's my house!"
That's my house. That's my house. And they walked all the way to 24th Street and about 6th Avenue, between 5th and 6th Avenue, something like that.
In there. Mm-hmm.
And our kids saw that, every time they'd come, as they grew up, and the house was still there. And once the lights were on in the house, and we could see in that house there was a living room in the front, and there was a room right next to the living room, which they called a sitting room. Remember the sitting room?
No.
And then beyond the sitting room was a dining room. Well, between the living room and the sitting room, there were colonnades, they called it. There were columns.
My father built those.
He did? I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
They were lovely wooden columns coming down. Their father was the one that had the mechanical ability in the family that some people have inherited in the next generation. But anyhow,
namely Maury.
It got into my genes, but not into Harry.
And none of the rest of the family either. You're the only one.
But these columns that came down were really very lovely, and they divided that living room from the sitting room.
Well, there was bookcases.
And there were bookcases next or above or next to, I forgot.
Well, the columns set on the book.
Yeah, below
Yeah,
the
but there's another
the
room.
books we had.
Wait, there's another
But wait a
room.
minute, but this one day, as we were driving by slowly with the kids so they could take another look at the house, the people who then lived in it, and by the way, the guy that moved the house liked it so well, he lived in it for a while there on 24th Street. But this day when we went by, the lights were on in such a way, and curtains must have been open or something, we could see right in. And of course, none of them were really old enough to really remember too much about the house. Chuck remembers some, but the others didn't remember very much. And there we could see those colonnades, and we could see right back. It was really so
I'll tell you
Well, now I
beautiful.
want to get to another room
I'll
of the
tell you
house.
something
Wait a
else
second.
about
I want to get to I want to get away from the construction right now. There was one room, the bathroom. Tell me the significance of the bathroom, Harry, in your life.
Which one? The
Bathroom
upstairs?
in your life? What a question!
The upstairs or the bed downstairs?
You mean the upstairs bathroom or the
upstairs bathroom,
downstairs
I want-
bathroom?
Oh.
What about? I don't know.
What
You
did
know,
you
by
use?
the step.
The bathroom upstairs. That was your
Oh.
own special room.
I practiced
Oh, where
there.
that? I'm thinking
The
of something
acoustics
else.
were very good.
The acoustics were very good.
All
in the
right, I want
bathroom.
you
We
to
liked
tell
to practice.
about it.
But what happened on the step? By that bathroom?
I
Do you
built your
remember?
little secret hiding place.
Wait a minute. Does Harry? Do you remember about
Since you mentioned it, I think...
Do you remember there were 2 steps going up to that bathroom? Because that bathroom
One step.
One step, excuse me. At the bathroom, I think, used to be a different room. They added the plumbing indoors because originally there was no plumbing in the house. But what was there on that step? Do you remember on the riser of that step? What was there?
It was hidden there or what?
Yeah, what did you put there? Do you remember
The money,
chazarai?
Yeah, so...
Do you know what chazarai is, you guys? That's the money that you... Chazarai merely means junk, nothing, garbage. But in order to...
I didn't want to leave it in the store.
In order to camouflage that you were not talking about money, if you said there was some money here, that would be a giveaway. But you'd say there's some chazarai over there, nobody would know what you were
It's
talking
junk.
about. See?
I modified the riser in the step. It's removable.
I hope we got it all out when
And
we
he
sold
put
the
his
house.
money in there. Bags of money.
And that, I
Money
thought
bags.
that's what you were
Money
talking
bags.
about.
But we
No,
never-
he
we
used
never-
to practice
we never
in the
referred to
bathroom.
money in case
He didn't do
Because
that in
of
my
the
day.
acoustics.
Oh, I
He
practiced a
tried
lot
that.
in that bathroom.
Years,
The
he's often
acoustics were
mentioned
very
it.
good.
And then tell about when there was a fire in the house.
A fire?
A fire?
Yeah,
Yeah,
fire
there
in the
was,
house.
Fire.
there was a small fire there. My mother got very excited, and she was thinking, what should I save? So she didn't save the money. She grabbed some old stockings. and
No,
I
she
don't know.
told you to save the shoes because you had new shoes.
yeah, new
And the
pair of shoes.
violin, she completely
When
forgot
was
about.
that?
I don't remember any fire.
Oh, I've
Wow,
heard
they
that story
thought
for
it was-
years.
I think they extinguished it before it got
Probably
to
was
the
Before
fire.
it got to be
minor.
a fire.
Yeah, but he said, here, you know, the violin has always been the most important thing. And here she told him to save the shoes, not the
This
violin.
valuable violin, it didn't enter her mind to say that. She knew
You
it
didn't have the
was.
Guarnerius
No,
yet.
no,
Yeah, I
no,
know
no, no.
The other violin wasn't worth saving.
Why, you've got a second violin, that's a pretty good
It
violin.
was shortly after I bought that violin.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's-
Anyway.
You know what else we've got yet from that old house?
No?
Up in the attic in the garage, we have an old galvanized wash tub. And this my mother used to take out every Friday afternoon. This is days before the plumbing, and she'd put a kettle of hot water on the stove. And Friday afternoon we would all take baths
Uh-huh.
in this tub. She'd put it on the chairs.
Oh, has this been going on all the time?
Baths. Is it still going?
Yeah, you're telling a story.
So we've still got
They're
that
on the air.
I can still remember myself getting a bath in the kitchen.
Well, you know, our kids
In
used
our
that
old house
before
when
the
we were
days
a
of the
kid.
plastic swimming pools. They would use these galvanized. I think you must. I bet you were here too at some point or other. They all use those galvanized
Yeah, it was
tubs
very
here.
common. You'd have a bath in a galvanized tub in the kitchen.
But in
Oh, you
the
had
old
all the
house too,
highlights.
Harry, do you remember in the old house where you kept the empty beer cases? The case of empties? Or the empty cases? I
In
don't know.
the apartment way in the back.
In
of
the
house.
barn, what
In
you
the
call the
barn.
barn. It used to be a barn, actually. And do you remember how Chuck used to pull the empty cases
Yeah,
in
we
his
got a-
wagon?
we got a
You paid him
picture
a
of
cent a
them.
case? For
I don't know how
two
much
cents?
I don't know if it was 1 or 2 pennies
Maybe
a
you
case.
charged me. I don't know.
But he worked for hours doing that. You
But Chuck
paid him.
had a good education those days.
Yeah,
In
he's
recognizing
successful.
whiskey bottles.
I know.
One
Oh,
time-
but wait a
one time
minute.
Evelyn-
Chuck did another. You paid him for something else too. In this sitting room, there was a sofa, kind of like a sleeper sofa, and there was a piano. And that was a place that I remember where Harry used to like to practice. And when Chuck was little, he would sit him down on that sofa, and he'd say, "If you sit here and listen, I'll give you a penny." So Chuck would
whole
sit there.
penny?
He would sit there on the sofa for change and be quiet, and Harry would practice. I don't know how long it lasted, but he'd get his penny every day. Do you
That made a
remember that?
businessman out of him.
Yeah, I guess you did. I guess you did.
One time Chuck was in the store, he was little, it was on a Sunday. Do you remember that, Harry?
Well,
The
what
slot
did he do?
machine, things were hot on the slot machines, you couldn't keep it out in front. So
You
there
had
was a
slot
partition
machines
there.
in the store?
So
Yeah, everybody
there
in
was a
town had it.
partition there, and the slot machine was on the other side of the partition. But the customers who wanted to pay it knew it was there, and they'd go there and play it. So it was on a Sunday morning. Harry is in the store checking up. The store was closed till noon. And Chuck wanders in, and he finds a nickel somewhere, and he gets up on a beer case, and he drops it in the slot machine, pulls the lever, and Harry hears a crack. He hit the jackpot. Do you remember that?
How old was he, 5?
Since you mention it.
Yeah,
I remember when it happened.
More than that.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe 6, 5 or 6 at the most. He had a good training, you see, good background.
It's a wonder he's not a
On Fifth
gambler.
Avenue. Chuck
Ron, I
Snyder.
hope you enjoy all these
This is
stories.
great.
But Harry was so fussy about sticking to the law. I remember the kids wanted to help out in the store, and they couldn't. He kept them out because minors were not allowed in the store, and he didn't want to
They
get
were very
arrested.
fussy. The law was very
So we
fussy.
were
And
never allowed in the
They
front.
weren't, but
No, but in
everybody
the
else's
back.
kids worked in their stores, except our kids couldn't work in the store.
That's no place.
Well,
And when they
Very
come in just to visit, we'd have to sneak them in the back door,
That's right.
which
Remember,
wasn't
I always
necessary.
liked the warehouse, and especially the walk-in cooler, that big, beautiful.
Well, what's
big-
sort of
The
like
Liberty,
about a
you mean
cooler?
at the Liberty?
Yeah, it was a very beautiful piece
Yeah,
with all the
Dad
woodwork.
thought he was renting out and selling the store to Lee's Liquors, and they would take it on condition that the cooler be gotten rid of. They were going to remodel the whole place. They're sending all kinds of people to measure things and this and that. And so they had finally found somebody to break down that cooler and take it away. The cooler was worth $15,000, and he was glad to just get rid of it because he was going to get rid of the building.
No, it wasn't 15,000.
It was.
Beautiful.
And
was
the end
such a
result
shame.
was the last minute, Lee's Liquors did not buy the store.
So the moral of that story is never do anything
Until you have it signed on the dotted line.
That's right.
Right.
Well, until you get the money for it, you can't.
That's right.
Oh, we even had gone to the lawyer with it, though. It was all written up.
Well, I'll tell you
It
one
wasn't
thing.
finalized.
Something somehow slightly similar to that. If those tenants ever leave the Fifth Avenue property, Garber Supply Building, or the other one behind it, whichever one it is, I'd like to see the mahogany.
That's in the Garber Supply
You
Building.
can't see them.
I know.
No,
it's
she would
underneath
rip
it.
off the wall.
Well,
Maury was telling Debbie how that original building that used to be the executive offices of the Rock Island Brewing Company, was it? That originally that was all that dark mahogany. When they took over the building for the plumbing supply business, it was so dark and dreary, you know, for an office, for people to come in, it just wasn't considered good. And so they covered it and painted it with all this
covered it with wallboard.
wallboard and painted it.
Oh,
No,
but the stuff is still good
the
behind
stuff
it.
is, who knows how good it is, but it's
That
there.
imitation wood paneling.
But the stairway, even going up to the second floor, the railing of the stairway, I think, is of that same stuff, isn't it?
The railing up to the second floor.
Yeah, no? I know I saw it somewhere.
Stop
But,
in sometime and look it over.
But that is under, and it's under those walls, and it has the big bay windows on various sides. It was terrible to heat and terrible to cool, but it was beautiful to look at, I guess, you know. But it was an old, old building.
When we took over, there was no access to the top floor. All they had was a hand-operated elevator.
Oh, I know, that big old
I
elevator
hired
with
a
the ropes.
carpenter, and we put in a stairway.
Oh, you put in the stairway there?
Huh?
You put in that
Yeah,
stairway?
we hired a carpenter. When we got up on the second floor, we found a coffin up there.
Oh, my gosh.
Where was that hit? I
At
didn't
one
know
time,
that.
somebody manufactured coffins up there.
And they never got rid of all their merchandise.
They forget about it or what? How could
I suppose.
they overlook a
Wait,
coffin?
what did you do with it?
I don't remember.
We decided to go up and see if there was anything in it.
Why, did you open it?
Well, the whole point of
You
the
don't.
story about the Fifth Avenue
Maybe it's still up
property
there.
is that it's still in the family, and that it's in trust for
That's why I say
Debbie,
one of these
Alan,
days-
That's why
David.
Debbie said that someday she
I
wants to
know,
go
but
there.
I know, but it's still in the family, so it'll be possible, probably. It's always been in the family, so someday maybe we can. Well,
Don't do it
it's-
while you have a good tenant there, Debbie.
No,
No, we have
I
a-
mean,
we
just
have a good
someday if
tenant
the
now.
That's
tenant
right.
leaves and
That's
the building
right.
has to be demolished, I mean,
That's
God forbid
salvage
that's
the mahogany.
happening. God forbid that should happen.
It'll cost you too much to demolish it.
She just wants to look under the wallboard and see the
I want them-
mahogany and see
yeah.
if she can use it. That's all.
What would you do with it?
Oh, I don't know.
She's not going to tell you now because she doesn't know, Maureen.
She wants to look at it.
I wonder if the coffin's still up there.
No.
Maybe it's stuff
We
full of
used
money.
it for a warehouse, for stuff
Oh.
that wasn't used too much.
I didn't know
That
there
was
was a
that-
coffin up
That's
there.
what that
You think it's
upstairs
still
floor
there?
was used for.
It's not there anymore.
And Maury was in business, you know, with Milt there
Mhm.
from 1948 until 1964. And that's when they dissolved their partnership. And at that point, business was so bad that it was a question whether he was going to just fold up or quit or what. And Milt didn't want to be involved anymore. And Maury didn't know what to do and finally decided he wanted to go on. So that's when he started Garber Supply. Before that, it had been Modern Plumbing Supply. And that's when I started working down there. And that was 64, and we kept going until 77. We sold our business exactly 1 year before Liberty Liquor was sold in September of 77.
And we were stuck with all the old property.
Debbie, when we sold
The old
our-
buildings, but thank heavens that
when I sold our
Fifth Avenue
business,
building is
I
rented.
lost my most
Oh,
valuable
Maury, don't put that on
employee,
tape.
my wife.
Maury.
For 15 years, she didn't ask for a raise. For 15 years, I didn't
Talk about
offer a
stories
raise.
again.
Honey, why don't you talk
There were
about your
both-
wife that way? She worked for you from the time we were married.
Well,
What
with
do you
the
think I
experience
did
you got.
before?
Yeah.
It's
guess-
a good
In a,
story.
in a small business, the whole family has to pitch in.
Ma and Pa operation, they call
Yeah,
it.
mom and pop.
The
Right.
days of the Ma and Pa operations are in the past. That's over
Yeah.
with.
But fortunately, the business gave us a living.
But Naomi tells me that isn't so because she still has Ma and Pa. She says she still has to pitch in and do
Yeah, she's one of the few.
one of the few. That's right. For the most part, it's over.
Small business doesn't
The
hardly have
young
a
women
chance.
want their own professional careers and lives, and the men have theirs. And small businesses, the days of the small businesses,
Going down the drain.
they are over.
Mhm.
They have to be where things are going.
Yeah.
Whether that's good or bad, I don't know, but that's the way it is.
Maybe the only good business left is to be a landscape architect. Get a drawing
You've
board,
got a
couple
point there.
Like
pencils,
Ron, huh?
couple pencils, and you're in business.
As long as you do good enough work so that people buy your product, and like everything else. And fortunately, Ron's work is of such high caliber that
Ron
his
was
work is in
very,
demand.
very good now at fixing
Flagstone
walks.
walks. I knew he was
We
going
don't need
to
this
say
on
that.
tape.
no, we don't need
We
it
don't
on
need
the
that
tape.
on tape, he said.
But he sure was a godsend to us because we've really been.
How much of the walk did you do? A fourth or a half or?
No,
God,
About a
maybe
fifth?
a fifth, not much.
Just a good
it
start.
was.
Yeah, good start.
It was really so good of him to do it because he was concerned that we were going to trip on those broken flagstones.
Oh,
Flat.
yes.
I have listened to the tapes, and my versions are that some of the statements are incorrect. My father, Charles Garber, arrived in New York from Russia in 1905. He didn't like New York, and as long as he had a landsman or friend living in Rock Island, he decided to settle in Rock Island. My mother, Mindla Garber, and baby Krana, or Karina, I was about 9 months old, left Grudno in Grudno-Gubernia, Russia, to join our father in America. The voyage was long and very tedious. Mother schlepped the parent, that's a goose-down feather quilt, and large goose-down pillows, and 4 silver candlesticks. She arrived directly to Rock Island. She was anxious to be with Lance-like friends. Mary, Harry, and Morris were born in a small apartment building on 3rd Avenue and 23rd Street. The owner was named Booney Baker. After Morris was born, she told us we had to move as she could get more money from other tenants. So we moved to a small dilapidated house 1 block north on 22nd Street and 2nd Avenue. I don't know what my father did to earn a living at the time. My school census taker had written that he was a shoe repairer and also worked for the Illinois Oil Company, but I don't know where his shoe repair shop was located. However, I remember he worked for Illinois Oil Company. When Mother had to start me to school, she told a neighbor girl to take me to school. She couldn't pronounce Crana, so she called me Caney. Then a lady friend told Ma to call me Sadie. I was age 5 when I started school, but when I was in school, that morning the teacher told me to kneel by the cross and bless Lord Jesus. The girl was Catholic and took me to St. Mary's School nearby. When I told Mother about the Salem, she immediately looked up her Jewish lady friend, and that lady named me Sadie, and she started me in kindergarten at Lincoln School. Ma had business ability. She wanted Pa to go in business, as Pa didn't earn much at the Illinois Oil Company. He was a barrel cooper. She heard about a house for sale at 2519 Fifth Avenue and wanted to buy it because it had 8 rooms and she could earn a few more dollars by keeping boarders. But she didn't have any money for the down payment. She also had a boarder in the tiny house that we moved into on 22nd Street on 2nd Avenue. His name was Icha Inker. He told her he would loan her $500 so she could buy the house and she could pay it out in installment payments. He was an angel from heaven. But soon his fellow workers in the junkyard told him how would we repay the loan and that he would lose his money. But we had 8 rooms, so Mother took in several boarders. Louis Trachtenberg, Joe Polishuk, Kowarski, Fox, and Icha Inker. She repaid the loan, and Inker returned to Europe, and we heard he passed away. Faye was born in our house at 2519 Fifth Avenue, so Pa built an additional bedroom on the first floor a few years later. He was also a carpenter, but couldn't find a carpenter job. He had built on 2 more rooms in the back of our house for additional income. The rooms rented for $2 a week, but there was no toilet. They had to use the toilet under the stairway in the front hall. A couple with 1 child rented the 2 rooms, and they moved out. However, his father and another man rented the 2 rooms. Louis Trachtenberg used to keep his motorcycle in the front hall, and that irked me because he would get grease and oil on the floor. By that time, I was already 14 years and graduated 8th grade. I told Ma she should get rid of the boarders. Also, when we moved to our house on 2519 Fifth Avenue, Pa started...
It's okay.
Pa started his shoe repair shop in our living room, and he went to the 9th Street to learn how to repair shoes so he could sell secondhand shoes. A Mr. Cohen, Howard Cohen's father, was the shoe repair teacher to teach him how to make a drop fit to repair second-hand shoes. But Father wasn't a businessman. If they told him the shoes were too large or too small, Pa agreed with them, so there was no sale. And as for shoe repairing, if he didn't give them a bargain, they said they will go elsewhere. So he gave. In the meantime, he got a job at Deere & Company, Moline. His occupation was a carpenter, but before he got the job at Deere & Company, I told him I didn't like a shoe shop in the living room. He then did carpenter work. He remodeled the living room of the Satins. They lived on 4th Avenue. He built a colonnade between the living room and the dining room. Then he remodeled the Kavensky's living room. Then he started to build a colonnade between the living room and the dining room at our house. Then he took the job at Deere & Company. Our landsman Morris Leibowitz was then working on the Rock Island Arsenal for the government, and he told Pa to apply for a job there. They were paying $25 a week. He was only earning $12 a week in Moline. So when he got that job, we were happy. The World War ended in 1918. Also, Pa was out of a job. No work to be had. And by that time, I didn't want Ma to have any more boarders. Mary and I took the large bedroom upstairs. Harry and Morris took another bedroom. And we made a bathroom out of another bedroom, as I didn't like the bathroom next to the kitchen. Well, Pa couldn't find a job, so he built a little store in our yard next to the house. It took him a long time, as he couldn't afford help. He had saved some money, enough to buy the blocks, and the block layer was slower than molasses in January. In the meantime, there was no income. I attended high school one year, and I had to make a decision that I must sacrifice my education and go to work and help support the family. I was small and thin, and weighed about 85 pounds. I took my mother's green dress, shortened it, and I remember the dress had long chiffon sleeves and a handmade bag that I made in the 6th grade sewing class. And I applied for a job at Peterson's in Davenport, Iowa. I was age 15 and told them that I was age 16. If you were under 16, you had to bring a birth certificate, but he didn't ask for a certificate. My pay was $7 a week. I gave it all to my mother. She took what she needed and managed to bank a few dollars for me. I started this job August 15, 1920. By 1923, Harry was already taking violin lessons. I was very proud of Harry, and he practiced every morning 5 o'clock. So I thought it would be nice if we had a piano. By that time, I had $276 in the bank. The piano cost $150. I paid cash, as the piano was purchased from a private party. I felt I was already too old to take up piano lessons. I was 18 years by that time. Faye was 8 years old, and I thought it would be nice if she took lessons and would accompany Harry. She took piano lessons and did accompany Harry, which we enjoyed very much. Zabowski and Gerwitz families did not have a piano. Adele and Dorothy Lerman had a piano. Zabowskis had 4 boys and 2 girls, and no room for a piano in their house. It was too small. Gerwitz had no room and were too poor to have a piano. I worked for years at Parker's in Davenport. I was a comptometer operator in the accounts payable department. I took up comptometer at night school. And I was also a reporter on the store pamphlet. I wrote up employees. Later, I was employed at Hill Furniture Company in Rock Island. I got $2 more in salary per week and also saved car fare money. I enjoyed sales work at Hill Furniture Company. I met George Bickman in Chicago, married November the 5th, 1938. 3 children. Marvin, consultant for Optotrek Company and married to Chavatzela, living in Israel. Minda, copy editor and freelance book critic for Time magazine in New York. Charla, attorney for the city of New York and married to Paul Fiandella. 3 grandchildren, Shira Reza Bickman, Menashe Bickman, Ari L. Bickman. I was membership chairman 10 years for the American Jewish Congress, 4 years corresponding secretary for Ner Tamid Synagogue, 2 years financial secretary, Ner Tamid Synagogue, 410 members. And I was nominated to continue in that capacity, but I couldn't accept because son Marvin and family were coming to Chicago. Recently, May 8, 1986, our grandson Menashe celebrated his bar mitzvah in Tel Aviv, Israel. It was very beautiful. 150 people attended. We have made 5 trips to Israel since our son Marvin was married March 24, 1969. I feel I have fulfilled my life. Carol Bickman.
line, it is a mighty fine line. The Rockland line is the road to ride. The Rockland line, it is a mighty fine line. If you want to ride, gotta ride it like you're flying. Get your ticket at the station on the Rockland line. Hey, C-double-X-Y-Z, cast in the cupboard and you can't find me. Oh, the Rockland line, it is a mighty fine line. The Rockland line, it is a road to ride. The Rockland line, it is a mighty fine line. If you want to ride, you gotta ride it like you're flying. Get your ticket at the station on the Rockland line. Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. Lord, you're gonna miss me when I'm gone. Well, the Rockland line, it is a mighty fine line. The Rockland line, it is a road to ride. The Rockland line, it is a mighty fine line. If you want to ride, you gotta ride it like you're flying. Get your ticket at the station on the Rockland line. Jesus died to save our sins. Glory to God, I'm gonna see him again. Oh, the Rockland line, it is a mighty fine line. The Rockland line, it is a road to ride. The Rockland line, it is a mighty fine line. If you want to ride, you gotta ride it like you're flying. Get your ticket at the station on the Rockland line. Moses stood on the Red Sea shore, smoking the water with a 2x4. Well, the Rockland line, it is a mighty fine line. The Rockland line, it is a road to ride. The Rockland line, it is a mighty fine line. If you want to ride, you gotta ride it like